Well, we're back already. Last volume left off with a big cliffhanger on what's up with Wilfried as the Archduke Conference looms on the horizon. The tensions in Arnsbach that have been building all part, as well as Rosamund going to the underground archive to transcribe for the royal family to help them along the path to the Grucha site, are gonna take center stage. But hey, here it is. Before we go ahead and get into that, we have our obligatory plugs. There should be a subscribe animation playing somewhere around here, maybe. Either way, that's how you stay up to date on Bookworm content from me. You can also check out my merch store to pick up some stuff to show your love for Bookworm. The Ehrenfest Gremlin design is still on sale, so check it out. And with those plugs out of the way, let's go ahead and get into Part 5, Volume 5. Our prologue begins from Bonifatius' perspective. He's meeting Sylvester for lunch to talk over some pretty important topics. As someone who's been forced out of retirement to supplement the archducal family, and having the training to essentially be Archduke, his opinion is pretty informed and well regarded. So Sylvester trusts him, obviously, but he's also running late to this meeting due to how much work Sylvester's now having to take on. Bonifatius doesn't really see that as a problem though, because the work Sylvester is doing was originally his work to begin with. Ferdinand was only coddling him by taking on so much of his responsibilities. But as Riarda prepares lunch, Bonifatius chats with her a bit. We get some interesting background on her as we know she's changed lords multiple times. But the reason why is finally explained through a third party. She was trained under Gretchen as an attendant, an older member of the archducal family long since passed, and was later ordered by the Aub at the time to serve Gabrielle, later switching to Veronica after she was being ostracized by the Lies gangs. Now she did serve Karstedt prior to his baptism because Bonifatius' brother, Adalbert, didn't yet have a male heir, so Karstedt was still an Archduke candidate. However, after he was baptized, Riarda was switched over to Georgine by Veronica's insistence, and later still, to Sylvester because he was a sickly child. But the main thing here is how stretched thin Sylvester's retainers are. Bonifatius and Wilfried are handling Ferdinand's former workload while Sylvester is actually having to do his job, on top of all the work that Bonifatius was taking on due to Rosamund's requests. But that's cool, as long as he gets to spend time with her. That was actually the main reason why he was trying to make her the Aub in the last book, so he could spend time with her while training her for the role. But why does Bonifatius do all that training? Well, because he promised his father he would in exchange for not taking the seat of Aub himself. Now, he hadn't expected that to be a lifelong promise, but that's what it shaped up to be. Now, Adalbert definitely needed the support because he was in poor health himself, but Sylvester is well enough to do all this crap himself. So basically, Bonifatius is a bit fed up, and that's when Sylvester comes in for their lunch meeting. As they eat and chat, Bonifatius struggles to pronounce the new foods that Rosamund has introduced, but basically her new ideas are mostly amazing, and he's proud of her. But the topic he really wanted to discuss was Wilfried. What exactly was Sylvester told about his trip to Lies Gang? Well, he got the bare bones from Wilfried's retainers, where he heard that he was treated coldly. Bonifatius lays it out. Wilfried essentially kicked down their doors and expected them to be willing to work with him in this political climate. Why the hell did he let his son go? Was he trying to set him up for failure? Well, kinda. Florencia thought it would be a good idea for him to get a dose of reality, but the issue comes in they threw him into the deep end, and now he has no motivation to actually work, literally throwing a tantrum to the point that Bonifatius wants to wash his hands of him. Because of Bonifatius' reputation as somebody who has worked with and trained multiple archdukes, that's equivalent to publicly saying that Wilfried isn't fit to rule. Damn, that's pretty harsh. Looks like all of his hard work in the academy just isn't translating outside of it. Oswald also failed to educate the boy, which was one of the reasons he was let go. He's damn dedicated to his lord, which is good, but also too used to Veronica's methods to change. But he was not the only problem. Wilfried is lacking motivation because he's constantly being compared to Rosamund by Bonifatius himself, despite the fact that Rosamund said not to compare them. Now, that was back after their baptism, and I guess no one really made the connection that they're not 7 anymore. Plus, Bonifatius drops a pretty harsh truth, that they're going to be compared by other nobles regardless, especially in the academy, so Wilfried needs to shape up already. If it comes down to it, Bonifatius wants Sylvester to disinherit Wilfried, but Sylvester fires back immediately with zero hesitation that he'd do the same to Rosamund in the same breath. Yeah, he's serious. But the more Bonifatius thinks about it, the more everything major in Ehrenfest is revolving around Rosamund. Her retainers are leading the Archduke Conference's preparation, she's in charge of printing the temple, and now one of her retainers is about to be the second wife. But that's still not all. Sylvester is working his ass off to the point that he barely leaves his office. Charlotte, Florencia, and even Melchior are all giving it their all at their respective jobs. Rosemine's not even in the castle, and she's still deeply involved. But what the hell is Wilfried doing? Not even trying. Yeah, Wilfried turned 13 this season, so Bonifacius wants him to give the kid a stern talking to. So we're at the point where Wilfried has pretty much regressed to a kid despite his age, but where is this going? It boils over next volume, but essentially we're seeing that not a damn thing has changed since Spring Prayer. In fact, it's kinda gotten worse. Alright, enough about Wilfried. They also need to talk about Rosemine, and this is not blind praise for once. Bonifacius asks if Sylvester has heard any rumors about her lately, and he hasn't, which is kinda weird, because the former Veronica faction, or what's left of it, specifically Oswald, is spreading a nasty rumor that she's in love with Ferdinand, and that they were touching inappropriately during the Interduchy tournament. But Riarda clears that up. She was there, and it was a medical exam. She would have intervened if it was inappropriate. Okay, but here's the question. Not who started, but who's actually circulating this rumor? They can't really tell, but Wilfried just blames her for inviting such a misunderstanding in the first place. And he isn't outright denying it? What an absolute idiot. Yeah, if only Rosemine was in the castle to help squash those rumors. But she's too busy in the temple, and even Bonifacius recognizes the importance of that now. But hey, even her retainers aren't escaping scrutiny. Despite her being needed in the temple, they're making no effort to get Rosemine to socialize like a normal noble woman. Now Bonifacius is in favor of this generational shift plan, but Rosemine does still need to understand socializing with her own duchy's nobles in a standard way. Riarda and Sylvester aren't too concerned because Rosemine's main skill is that she surrounds herself with people who can do what she can. Hell, she's really good at raising people too. Because of all of her skilled retainers, she's the one who actually guided them on their path to focus on their strengths. It's to the point that even Sylvester is jealous of her staff. Though Bonifacius does worry about her name-sworn retainers too. They could be a problem in the future, but he also doesn't doubt that she can actually control them. The main issue is, all these recent name swearings are bringing up old memories among nobles. Ones who remember when Veronica and Georgine demanded names for loyalty. Even if there is a major difference, most nobles don't see it between what Rosemine is doing and what they did. This has set a precedent that one can swear their name to avoid punishment, meaning those who did it out of actual loyalty will appear to be criminals if this keeps up. The whole name swearing to escape punishment was actually Sylvester's idea, but anything new tends to be pinned on Rosemine. They, as her guardian and grandparent, need to advise her to think more carefully about why traditions and norms exist before she decides to go turn them on their head, so she doesn't cause problems. Though Sylvester says he'll just take responsibility, because what's another bad rumor about him, right? That won't do. Ehrenfest won't benefit from an Aub with a garbage reputation, but this does make Bonifacius wonder, how much is Rosemine being kept in the dark? Yeah, I told you that whole name-swearing implications thing would come back up. And the thing is, getting absolute loyalty from a criminal seems like a no-brainer to avoid killing them. However, it does reflect poorly on those who did it as a show of actual unwavering loyalty, like Roderick, Eustace, and Eckhart. On top of the issues we're seeing with Wilfried's new name sworn, this is one of the rare times where changing a tradition has negative consequences, and why the world building in this series is so solid. Because this thing was introduced pretty early on, but the cultural implications of it are explored later. Back to Rosemine's perspective, it's finally time to make all the kids official blue robes. So she performs the fealty ceremony and walks them through their daily schedule. Now the orphanage kids don't have the same obligations because they get to go to the forest, which hey, Nicholas wants to do too. But that's a big no can do, because bro's an actual noble, and heads would literally roll if anything happened to him. Next she discusses the preparations for the upcoming Starbind at the Archduke Conference with her retainers. Hartmut is coming, as expected, but the only thing she needs to bring is her Bible and ceremonial robes. Since she can't exactly borrow the Sovereign Temple's Bible, half of that thing is empty. Aside from that, her guards need to wear blue robes to protect her because they won't let knights up on stage during. And hey, her adult knights don't have an issue with it. Even Leonore, who didn't actually do the dedication ritual over winter like the other knights. Next is the issue of attendance, which Otillie is the only arch attendant she has who can accompany her to the archive, so I guess that's settled. Is Clarissa gonna be okay without her supervision? Lisa Letta will go too to keep her chambers in order, but obviously she can't enter the archive. She's a med noble. We know that from Overwinter. Well, Felina's feeling left out, and Daniel cheers her up by saying that they need someone to watch over the temple while they're away. And that's when Rosemine finally notices that she's absolutely beaming. Wait, didn't she have a crush on Roderick? Now Rosemine finally gets it. She's actually crushing on Daniel. Too bad he's still too dense to notice. Over on to Melchior as they're heading to the orphanage. He has something of interest to report. and the adults actually gave him a pretty important detail to tell Rosemine so he wouldn't feel left out. They found some silver cloth in Gerlach's estate, but the scholars only reported how weird it was. She's planning to ask Lorenz and Matthias for the details later, since they've been on break for a bit after helping with the investigation. This is our first time hearing about this silver cloth, but the impacts on the story are going to be pretty big. In the orphanage though, Wilma notes how some of the children have lost motivation after realizing the late noble children actually got picked up by their families because they have the mana befitting their status. The ones who were higher status though, turns out they didn't have magic tools. They were most likely going to be kept as servants and just hadn't been told yet. Now the difference in treatment is stark between families, so they pretty much resigned themselves to living in the temple. Well, they need to fix this manpower shortage, and these kids have mana. So Rosemine asks Hartmut if they had the magic tools. Could they make it in time to become nobles? I mean, I guess if they forcefully chugged rejuvenation potions they could. Turns out, that's how the apprentice blue robes who were called back to noble society managed after the Civil War. But she can't shoulder this burden. If she even tries, it'll cause a massive upset among the noble population for doing too much for the children of criminals. She tries to frame it as only helping those within her power, but this is more a question for Sylvester, not Hartmut. So why not invite him for the Divine Protections ritual to discuss it? That's a great idea. And later, he and Bonifatius show up for their rituals and to discuss the silver cloth. Though Sylvester shoot out to do his ritual so Bonifatius can tell Rosemine their findings himself, because he's stoked to spend time with her. Turns out, it's a strange cloth that not only rejects mana, it's made without it too. Now, even leather that resists mana still contains and conducts it, but this cloth actually rejects it. How is that possible? If you recall, we learned a while ago that everything in Jürgenschmidt has mana, even commoners and quote-unquote normal plants and animals. They just have very little compared to what is commonly called Fey. So Bonifatius pulls it out and lets Rosemine take a look. It's got frayed edges, but doesn't look too strange otherwise. But the fact that the edge is frayed is part of the mystery that she didn't even notice because of her commoner origins. Most nobles would just transform their stop and cut it, but that's when Bonifatius demonstrates the scariest application of this cloth. He turns his stop into a knife, and has his attendant place the cloth on a stack of boards. He then stabs it as hard as he can, but while the boards crack under Bonifatius' impressive strength, the cloth itself is undamaged. While it won't stop an impact, it won't let mana pass through it, so a stop-made weapon can't cut this cloth. That's why it was torn instead. So here's the real mystery. This cloth was found in Gerlach's estate in his province, but he left in a hurry, as we know. So how the hell did he end up undeniably dead in the Nobles' Quarter with no way out? There is an answer, and that question is actually the foreshadowing for what would otherwise seem like a very out of left field reason. Further, he and Sylvester toyed around with it in a mock duchy, like in the Archduke candidate classes. Things covered in this cloth could pass through the border without the Ob sensing its presence. There's also evidence that the former Geeb Gerlach tried to burn something in this hidden room where they found this. So they assumed that this silver cloth was just a rare case of him being sloppy, assuming his family was going to be executed and thus no one would have had access to this hidden room. Now, wouldn't bringing blood relatives in to help with investigations make a ton more sense moving forward? Well, considering they'd be in mana-sealing handcuffs and no one really knows what's in the hidden room they're about to investigate, that's probably not a great idea. But in this rare case, saving the kids of the former Veronica faction helped in the investigation. And while Sylvester is gone, Bonifatius takes this chance to set Rosemine straight on this whole name swearing, and how her influence has shifted its meaning. Some think she threatened them with death for their servitude. Originally, name swearing was meant to be a sacred act, not a way for families to escape punishment. Roderick said something to that effect a while back, but now that Bonifatius is flatly saying the consequences that this could become widespread across the whole country through her, she may have just fundamentally changed its meaning in this simple act. And that's a cold dose of reality for Rosemine. But before it gets too serious, Bonifatius says he's done lecturing, because he's tired of playing the bad guy. It should have been up to her plethora of parental figures to tell her this, and her retainers should be stepping up to keep her in line when she gets too out of hand. Damn, retainers got a tough job in this franchise. They need to be a guiding force for their lord, but also not too ambitious to act out of turn and make their lord a puppet, while also obeying the intent behind their orders, unless those orders would actually indirectly harm their lord, in which case, they need to know that and also not act on it. The whole damn job is shades of gray and changes depending on who you ask. Alright, we're still not done though. Time for more serious chats now that Sylvester is back. After boasting that he got 21 protections, becoming omni-elemental through 3 life subordinates, including the god of getting it on, they pick back up on the silver cloth. Now, Kernberger taught Rosemine that face stones are rare outside the country, so mana-less ingredients might be common outside of Jürgenschmidt, meaning this could have just been an import from another country. I wonder which country this could have been, when Grausam is sworn to the first wife of the only duchy with an open country gate. So where did this asshole go after giving the gang the slip? Arnsbach most likely. And with that cloth, he wouldn't have even needed to use a border gate. So Rosemine wants to inform Ferdinand, but that comes with some baggage. Can Rosemine get a message past the censors? They're both watching her very carefully all of a sudden, and she says that Sylvester has such a means of communication, so leave it to him, right? He told her that last book. With that, she seems to have passed their test, and Bonifatius steps out to go do his ritual. So now that it's just her and Sylvester, he drops some pretty big news. All Arnsbach's passing was officially announced, and that means that Detlinde will need to dye the foundation. So Ferdinand's starbind is going to be delayed as a result, because she can't dye the foundation if she starts mixing mana with Ferdinand like a normal married couple would. Now she's worried because, is he returning home or at least getting a hidden room? Yeah, that's not really her place to worry about. He won't come back unless their engagement is cancelled, and that kinda segues into the next topic. She and Sylvester have to have a very awkward discussion. What exactly is Rosemine's relationship with Ferdinand? He's her guardian, right? Yeah, Ferdinand probably sees it that way too. But the issue is, her constant worrying over a man who doesn't belong to their duchy anymore isn't a good look. Now her getting his estate isn't that crazy considering he didn't have any next of kin besides Sylvester, but the fact that she didn't change the staff or furniture kinda seems like he's hoping for a divorce. And also that she might be holding out hope that he's coming back. Basically, she's kind of acting like his wife in noble society, and that's not okay. Both of them are engaged. Sylvester and Karstedt explain the rumor that she's in love with Ferdinand, and she says she does love him like family, but not romantically. But I don't know, can she try worrying about Wilfried like she does Ferdinand maybe? That might help dispel some of these rumors if she actually acted like she was engaged. Well, no. She puts her foot down that Wilfried isn't working himself to death like Ferdinand, also isn't in grave danger by living in another duchy that's actively hostile towards Ehrenfest. So how can she worry about him when he's living such a cushy lifestyle? In fact, if she even tried, she'd probably just end up scolding him for not working harder. Okay, so she's too focused on Ferdinand and not her fiancé, but that's not really her fault either. She's having a hard time getting close to Wilfried because he's being such a jerk. When she tries to share intelligence, he just blows her off. Hell, the charm she made him for Spring Prayer, which is like actual fiancé type of work, he didn't even thank her for it. What a fucking failure of a man. Yeah, Sylvester's really gonna have to have a talk with him, but she needs to accept the fact that Ferdinand is gone, and he isn't obligated to help her anymore. She's gonna spend the rest of her life with Wilfried, and they need to support one another. And I mean, don't get him wrong, Sylvester's right there with her. He was relying on Ferdinand a ton too, but Wilfried is her biggest tie to Ehrenfest, so she needs to get along with him better, or else she could be taken. And how can she do that? I don't know. Maybe try treating him like she would Ferdinand. The boy's about to get swarmed with ordinances. Maybe we'll get lucky and one will get lodged in his brain. Okay, so now that that scolding's over, what did she want to discuss? Oh yeah, kinda forgot that was one of the main reasons she invited him over, but she launches into her plan to get the kids of the former Veronica faction magic tools to become nobles. Yeah, hard pass. Her saving their lives is more than enough, and despite her best efforts to make a case, Sylvester is actually firm on this. Her idea was to just loan these kids the tools and money because who the hell is gonna pay for their upbringing? And I mean, that's not cool. Sylvester isn't nearly as bad as the American education system because he has enough of a conscience to not saddle these kids with lifelong debt they couldn't hope to pay back. It's gonna be years before these kids could even start to be a benefit to society. So there's really no merit for Sylvester doing it. On top of that, the assets he seized from the former Veronica faction are to be distributed amongst his allies. The fact that he gave her anything at all for these kids is already more than he was obligated. People still would rather just see them executed. Like Bonifatius just told her, she needs to look at the bigger picture. Okay, that's settled I guess, despite her not being too thrilled about it. Sylvester changes the topic to the Archduke conference where she's got her affairs in order, but that's when Bonifatius shows up looking sorted down. Did he fail his ritual? No, he got 17 new protections. But Sylvester still beat him, so he's feeling pretty down. Bright side, he's omni-elemental now too, and is eager to test just how strong he's gotten. Fucking terrifying. It's finally time for the Archduke conference. At the castle, she touches base with her retainers once more. Clarissa has her transcription stuff ready for the archive, while she and Hartmut will handle Dunkelfelger's negotiations. We already know that only adults can attend the Archduke Conference, so Rosamine has to leave behind her underage retainers. Felina and Roderick will visit the temple still to keep the new blue robes on track. Matthias and Lorenz are going to do that too though, when they're not training, which won't be much. Bonifatius is having the knights train with physical weapons to deal with the silver cloth crap. So yeah, they're carrying those on them at all times now, and Gresha and Judith are going to stay in the castle. So the next day, they get ready to head to the conference, where Wilfried, Charlotte, and Melchior see Rosamine off. Things are a bit tense between Wilfried and her, but her constant stream of ordinances won't reach from the academy, so he's gonna have to do without. Betty's happy to hear that, because it's like Rosamine is trying to make him work more with those. And I mean, that's not wrong. Anyway, he tells her that he's worried about her being forced to help the royal family, and to remember that she represents Ehrenfest there, so basically be careful. She tells him to work hard supplying the foundation since Bonifatius and Sylvester got a boatload of new protections, and Charlotte and Melchior might just pass him if he gets too complacent, and the response she gets is non-existent. What does that mean exactly? Well, the fact that Wilfried isn't immediately declaring that he won't lose to his younger siblings should clue you in that he's basically given up. At the dorm, things look the same, but the vibes are off. It's weird seeing a familiar setting full of adults rather than kids. But she takes a seat while her room is being prepared. Elvira comes by in full scholar gear and tells her she has the books they're permitted to sell this year. One of them is the latest volume of Fernestein, and Laura's gonna be pleased about that. So a copy will be dropped off to Rosamine's room later. That's when Sylvester comes in and gives her the warning that the Starbind is on the first day, so she needs to make her preparations first thing in the morning. Well, I mean, she was already gonna do that, but after that warning, he and Florencia head to their rooms because otherwise, the scholars couldn't work. In contrast, the knights are bored stiff. Their job at the conference is basically just standing around and guarding, so there really wasn't much for them to do in the dorm. Well, Rosamine has a great idea. Maybe they could go hunt at the gathering spot since it's been enriched. As long as they get permission, that is. And Angelica jumps at the chance. That night, dinner really smacks her with the realization that she doesn't belong, because alcohol is served. Not to her, obviously, but the talk is much more business-oriented than she's used to. Tea parties are already being arranged, and the former 6 years are raided home offering their input on the discussions. Well, not much for her to do, so she heads back to her room as soon as she's finished. But as Ottilie gets her ready for bed, they talk about what her plans will be for this winter. Ottilie will be busy, so she can't exactly come to the academy with Rosamine, so will she take Lieseletta? Once Hartmut is married, it won't really be an issue, but that won't happen until Rosamine comes of age. The only reason she's at the conference in the first place is because her entire family's there, so she actually has the leeway to attend. Well, Brunhilde will still be there next year, so Lieseletta will have to do as her adult attendant. But after that, there's things she won't be able to do as a med noble, so Rosamine's gonna need a new adult attendant sooner rather than later. Well, better talk this over with her mothers then. Look, long-term plans never pan out in this series, so I wouldn't worry about it. And in the morning after breakfast, she gets ready for the ceremony and meets with Leonore and Angelica, who are dressed in their blue robes. Clarissa is jealous, of course, but she'll have to take notes from the crowd. So with that, they head over to where the graduation normally takes place. They catch a glimpse outside of the academy for the first time not during winter, and that's honestly quite the shock. Her and most of her adult retainers are used to it being covered in snow. But hey, it's actually green outside, and the grounds look damn beautiful. Pretty neat. But when they get to the hall, they meet with the Sovereign High Priest Emmanuel. He and Hartmut have a dick measuring contest where Hartmut wins because, well, he's not backing down even a little. But the dude wants to serve as the High Priest for the ceremony, and Hartmut says that Ehrenfest is the one performing it, and he's Rosamine's retainer. Like hell, he's giving up that spot as High Priest. He's gonna be the one doing it. Emmanuel is creepy as hell and getting a crazed glint in his eye as he talks to Rosamine about ceremonies and such, which is weird considering it's not Hartmut for once. But they rush along the final checks and everything seems in order. But Emmanuel says they're not. Rosamine is missing the Goddess of Light's crown and the God of Darkness's cape. That's weird. Isn't that them over on the altar? So how is she the one missing them? According to Emmanuel, however, an ancient text in the Sovereign Temple they uncovered details how the Starbind was performed long ago. The High Bishop at the time apparently wore the divine instruments during it. Eglantine told them that Ehrenfest has kept its old traditions alive, so they assume that she already knew. He launches into a tirade about how no one believes the Sovereign Temple's claims about the old ceremonies, and how Det Lind activated the circle for selecting the next Zend. so they dove deep into their own records to revive old ceremonies in hopes of finding a true king. But that's about when Rosemine tunes him out. After some convincing, mainly he doesn't think she'll be able to even read it, and also what's it matter? She doesn't have the divine instruments. So she makes them with her stop to shut him up, and puts them on. That floors him, and he hands it on over, only for her to dismiss her stop because why the hell would she wear them just to read? The tablet in question is like the records from the underground archive, but sure enough, it does say the High Bishop used to wear the crown and cape, but it doesn't say what'll actually happen when she does. That's troubling. Well, she doesn't really have the authority to just do this on her own, and sends off an ordinance to Anastasius for permission. He races over and hears what the Sovereign Temple wants her to do, and he says that as long as they have a heads up, they'll manage. He doesn't like not knowing what's gonna happen, but as long as a starbind happens, who cares? Probably the flashier the better, honestly. So they said they prepared for the worst, but honestly, it's in their best interest for this to be as crazy as possible. But the real issue is they didn't actually prepare enough, as we'll find out. So the Archdukes enter, and the ceremony kicks off. Her just being there causes a stir because apparently not everyone was told she would be performing it. But we learn why Hartmut was so insistent on being the High Priest besides his own mania. He doesn't trust Emmanuel at all, and if he tries anything, the knights have permission to cut the dude's arm off. So once on stage, the adults enter to marry. This isn't just Sigiswald's starbind after all, but he is obviously the main attraction. All Archduke candidates have their weddings at the Archduke Conference, assuming they're not marrying down in status, but Ferdinand's not among them. Obviously, we were told that already. As the ceremony proceeds and she reads the relevant Bible passage, a shriek that's obviously Frau Larm's cuts through the room. So that's our confirmation that she knew about the poisoning attempt back in Part 4, Volume 9, and that's also why she was asking Rosemine about her health in Volume 1. She's surprised because she actually managed to open the Bible. It's supposed to be fake, remember? The real one's in Arnsbach as a plot to get Ferdinand in trouble. And that's all assuming that she actually survived the poison. When it's time for the blessing, she dips behind her retainers for cover and creates the two divine instruments. When she reappears, everyone is stunned, but she calls up Sigiswald and Adolfina for their blessing. Yeah, they're obviously surprised, but Adolfina assumes those are Ehrenfest copies of the divine instruments. But Rosemine doesn't tell them they're from her stop. Why draw attention to it, right? They sign the contract along with the other couples, and Rosemine gives the prayer and blessing. But as she does, the God of Darkness's cape unfurls and flies up towards the ceiling, creating a brilliant night sky then and there. Then the Goddess of Light's crown lifts off her head and glows like the sun. As the prayer finishes, the cape and crown converge into a single point, and then a golden black pillar fly off into the sky, like we suspected it probably would. Then a large blessing rains down on the newlyweds. Mission accomplished. And that's why they don't need to hold the starbind at night in the Royal Academy, because they can just make their own. While everyone is still stunned into silence, Hartmut has her guards get her off stage, and they take her back to the dorm through a less traveled path. Damiel carries her so she can keep up, while Angelica takes the lead. Why the rush? Well, they heard from Emmanuel that he said a true Zent must be found for the country, and his plan to do that is to get Rosemine into the Sovereign Temple as their High Bishop to perform ceremonies and locate their true ruler. So they're getting her away from that zealot before he can try anything. I mean, it's just the temple though, right? Can't they just ignore him? Yeah, that's what nobles would normally do, but the royal family is also pretty Grutricite obsessed right now, since they kinda need it. Who knows what sort of royal decree might be ordered as soon as their interests align, so they're not taking any chances. The problem is, they don't get that far, because up ahead, Emmanuel and some blue robes step out to stop them. He asks Rosemine to join them in the temple book room and learn about their ancient rituals, and while that's pretty tempting, her guards push through, with Angelica pulling out Stenluke to get them to back off. And after that dramatic end to the ceremony, they make it back to the dorm, safe and sound. The fact that people are warning Rosemine not to let her feelings for the royal family cloud her judgment in this situation is important. She did something crazy in front of every single archduke in the entire country, on top of demonstrating her value to the royal family itself. What demands could come from that are yet to be seen, but just remember that there's a reason that everybody and their brother has been telling Rosemine to avoid the royals since Part 4. This is the book we actually find out why. After Sylvester and Florencia get back, they want a full explanation, but there's really nothing to say. These aren't the students she usually attends with, so they're not used to how crazy the academy gets when she's involved. But basically she tells them the Sovereign Temple wanted her to do it old school, and Anastasius agreed. So it's their fault. They can complain to them. She didn't even know what was gonna happen, which isn't super smart to admit, but if they get questions, direct them to the royal family. Hartmut chimes in with how dangerous Emmanuel is and to be wary of his antics. Dude's not noble, and only has his eyes on Rosemine to revive their rituals so they can get a truce end. But that has absolutely nothing to do with Ehrenfest. If he ends up working with the royal family, Rosemine could be stolen as easily as finding an excuse that the other duchies would accept, and they may need to use her help in the archive as leverage to refuse such a request. I mean, she shouldn't even be there in the first place, right? So they're already bending over backwards for the royal family. And with that, Sylvester's on the same page. He's gonna refuse if they ask for Rosemine. Alright, they're really stressing how dangerous the Sovereign Temple is in this situation, but more as a motivator to get the royal family to act. And the issue is, after that display and what Dunkelfelger did, this religious revolution she kickstarted might come back to bite them in the ass. So how are they gonna avoid that? That's basically the plot for this volume. At lunch, we get bombarded with Clarissa talking about how amazing Rosemine was. She saw the whole thing from the stands, while Hartmut adds details he saw from the stage. The way she describes it is so dense in metaphor and artistic interpretation, Rosemine just can't keep up. Hopefully Ottilie can save her, but no. She gave up on that a long time ago. Rosemine then tries to change the subject, but Lieseletta is even low-key into the whole Rosemine hype at this point, which only gets Clarissa started more. Rosemine ends it by saying if she's too busy nerding out to actually eat and she wants to keep that up, she'll make sure her food is prepared to a lesser standard, since she's basically wasting it by talking. The next day, it's time for her to head to the library. The previous afternoon's meetings went about as expected with questions, but they successfully pinned it on the royals. Or so they think, but after the adults leave, she's stuck waiting until third bell when she finally gets to head out. They divvy up responsibilities where Damiel and Angelica will stand guard at the library entrance to let them know if anybody comes by. Lieseletta will work between the library and dorm to pass supplies to Ottilie, while the arch nobles will all head down to the archive with her. And once they head down to the library, Schwartz and Weiss greet her by asking for mana, which Lieseletta absolutely loves seeing the Schumils again, but Ottilie is shocked to see them calling Rosemine their master in person. I skipped over this in Part 5, Volume 2 due to an oversight, but when Rosemine filled the library foundation with mana, Schwartz and Weiss were still calling Hortensia Milady, but by the time she came back to research the rituals for their dinner game, they had started calling her Milady. The general idea is that when she filled the library's foundation with the mana from her shop, that's when she took ownership. Hortensia has yet to take it back, so she's their master once again. So she heads into Solange's office, and there's quite the crowd. Anastasius and Eglantine are there to help out in the morning. Not that they can actually understand the language used in the archive, but they can at least transcribe it for scholars to translate later. Anna Laura and Hildebrand are there as well, where we find out that Hildebrand has actually learned some of the ancient language. But he's still going to be transcribing for later modernization. His skills aren't up to par. But there is a new face among the royals. We're officially introduced to Magdalena, the king's third wife and Hildebrand's mother. She's pretty friendly on first meeting, but her backstory is a train wreck of drama she had to overcome to get her current position. This is also Hannah-Laura's relative, so she's a former Archduke candidate from Dunkelfelger who attended the academy at the same time as Ferdinand. Oh wait, wasn't there a Dunkelfelger Archduke candidate Heisitza tried to hook Ferdinand up with, and she was pissed about it, using that as leverage to gain the marriage she actually wanted? Yikes. We learned that the marriage yesterday worked better than the royals even expected, but Rosemine's not one to pry into their business. That probably won't come up later on. In the underground archive, Rosemine gets her usual remark from Schwartz as she enters, but a new contender has entered the archive. Hildebrand actually made it through the barrier? Mazel tov. Turns out he asked his mother to teach him the Dunkelfelger patented mana compression method, and the king was so moved by his plight to gain more mana, he actually permitted him to learn the royal one too. Dude's starting to compress his mana already. Bet he's gonna have a huge growth spurt. But in case you were wondering, Anna Laura, Hildebrand, and Magdalena don't have enough elements or prayer. But when Anastasius enters, he got an updated message. Turns out he's omni-elemental now after using the replenishment prayer like Rosemine said. Well, Eglantine got the exact same message. This is her first time in the archive after all, so did she become omni-elemental too? Well, no. She always was apparently. Bet that won't have a bigger impact later on. But forget about increasing elements in prayer. They need to transcribe. That's why they came, right? And come lunch, Anastasius and Eglantine have to dip because they have duties to attend to, but everyone else takes a break for a meal. Magdalena and Hildebrand would normally head back to their villas, but since it's the Archduke conference, she'd best stay out of the public eye as well. and decides to just have lunch with Rosemine and Hannelore. It's already been said before, but there is a pretty big push to make Hildebrand the heir, because his family in Dunkelfelger ranks higher and is a greater duchy than the children of the king's first wife. She's from Gelessenmeyer, which is a middle duchy ranked 4th. So basically, if Magdalena is seen during the conference, it would make people think she's aiming to overtake the king's first wife, which would probably gain some traction and actually cause conflict. But as they eat, Magdalena asks Rosemine about the ceremony yesterday. No one there could actually attend aside from her, but they all did hear stories. Apparently, Lestalot wanted to paint the scene so badly as soon as he got back in the dorm that he actually got scolded. Pretty funny. But from what they were told, the magic circle for selecting the Zent lit up on stage. So it sounds like all the nobles are pleased because Sigiswald has been recognized by the gods to be the next Zent. Yeah, let's go with that. Rosemine immediately realizes that if it lit up on stage, she was probably the one who activated it and not Sigiswald. But rather than bringing that to everybody's attention, she instead says that she didn't notice it from the stage itself. I mean, she was looking up for one, but it's weird that no one in Ehrenfest mentioned it at all. Guess she'll have to ask when she's back in the dorm, right? After lunch, they get back to transcribing, but not long into the process, they're interrupted by an ordinance. It seems that Lind is coming to learn how to take the throne. They need to hide while Solange keeps her distracted, because as it turns out, Lind hasn't actually been registered with the library yet. But this is a blessing in disguise, because Magdalena is pleased to have the opportunity to speak with Lind in person. So they all make their way to the Closestack archive because Solange told them there's a hidden exit there in case of emergencies. They can't just slip out to the central building either, because those finishing lunch might see them there. Basically, they're gonna have to hang tight until Solange tells them Lind left. They hide amongst the shelves in the back while waiting for what feels like forever. Just as Rosemine is about to lose patience and read instead, they overhear some extremely plot-relevant information as Hortensia and Solange get Lind to admit she heard about the archive through an anonymous letter. How careless. But since Sigiswald activated the magic circle during his starbind, Lind doesn't want to fall behind in her search. She assumes the royal family will come there too. She was a Zent candidate first after all, so why would she let them get ahead? Hortensia says that's a pretty rude thing to say, but Lind doesn't really see the issue. They're not a real royal family without the Grutricide after all. As she continues to trash talk the royal family while her retainers remain silent, Hortensia cuts through to ask a pretty odd question. Her husband apparently has a thing for Sloftrom's flowers and asks if they're currently blooming in Arnsbach. Lind's never heard of them though, but Hortensia tells her to ask Georgine about it. That's a pretty packed little remark. What are these flowers? Why would Georgine know about them? And what's the connection to Raublut? Congratulations, you just tripped over the tip of our climax iceberg for this entire series. Those are questions that are going to be answered over the next 5 books, and they're game changers. Okay, so Rosemine's confused because that was out of nowhere, and pretty damn deliberate. Maybe she should ask Ferdinand, because that conversation just name-dropped 2 pretty important antagonistic forces in Rosemine and Ferdinand's lives, connecting both Georgine and Raublut. But that's a pretty bad look too, considering she just got yelled at for getting too close to Ferdinand before the conference. Maybe Sylvester will be the right play then. Hard to bring it up though without the Adalgisa baggage. And that's when Solange comes back and shows them the exit. It leads to an overgrown garden area outside the library where people obviously used to have tea parties. Well, the weather is nice, but Rosemine's retainers tell her to use a high beast so she doesn't get too tired. And to stay hidden, they should probably break for the trees to avoid getting spotted. Cornelia sends an ordinance off to have Daniel and Angelica meet up with them. As much as they want to turn this into a picnic, that's not happening, because they're supposed to be hiding. To kill time, they chat about Fairnestein, which apparently even Hildebrand is caught up on the series, wants to know if there's gonna be a happy ending. Well, good thing she has the final volume, and plans to lend it out to Hannelore. But just then, Angelica spots an ivory building they'd never seen before. It's too small to be a dorm, but they might as well check it out. Got nothing better to do. Oh, I didn't realize it was time for more foreshadowing to pay off already. The building is locked up tight and doesn't appear to be a shed or anything. Also, it's filthy since it hasn't been touched in a decade at least. But the structure does seem familiar to Rosemine, because it looks like the temple viewed from the lower city. Suddenly she remembers a story that Bonifatius told her about damaging a shrine by accident during a game of Ditter at the academy. And then there's one of the academy mysteries about a student disappearing after playing pranks on the shrines of the gods. So maybe it's one of those. She pulls out a piece of fey paper and uses a mass wash-in courtesy of Clarissa to clean the shrine up. After that, she gestures to Hannelore and Hildebrand to join her for a rest, but accidentally brushes up against the lock in the process. suddenly she's pulled inside the shrine, where she sees on an altar a statue to Leidenschaft carrying a blue slate, and surrounding him are his 12 subordinate gods. Suddenly she's struck with the urge to pray, and asks for a growth spurt. Her mana gets sucked out in the process into the blue slate, and then some weird text appears on it, basically saying that her prayers have reached him, and he grants her a word to obtain the Book of Mestianora. She takes the slate and finishes reading that she needs the words from the other primary gods in order to become a true Zent. Cool, but just as she finishes saying that word, the slate gets sucked inside her and she can tell it fused with her divine will. Essentially, the slates are a mixture of divine will and the mana she offered up in prayer. Likely, this is where the Pillars of Light shot off to each respective god involved in the rituals. Then the word she learned is burned into her mind, much like with the God of Darkness and Goddess of Light's names. And with that, she's suddenly back outside, and not even a single moment has passed. Well, that was weird. And now that she is outside, she's suddenly struck with how surreal that situation was, much like when she was in the Goddess's Path. Holy shit, that's 3 books in a row now that we've referenced that event. She just went with the flow and prayed without a worry. But damn if she isn't stoked to read the Book of Mestianora now. What was that called again? The Grutricite? Oh wait, her getting it would be pretty bad and probably cause issues, wouldn't it? The royals are looking for the Grutricite, but if this book is the Grutricite, then maybe she could read it and just hand it over. They'd probably appreciate any tips on finding it, but another equally likely case is they'd probably just kill her and take it for themselves. Damn, she needs someone to talk to about this, but who? As she looks up, she sees some blue lights in the sky, and as she points them out to everyone else, no one can see them. I wonder what those could be. Just then, an ordinance arrives from Magdalena, saying it's safe to come back. Well, she really stepped into the thick of it at this point, and this is just the start. Things are about to get crazy from here on out, now that Rosemine has just stumbled onto the path to the Book of Mestianora. How will the royals react if they learn about this? Well, let's find out, because things rarely go as planned. Back in the archive, they talk with Magdalena about what happened. They tell her about the shrine, and Rosemine asks if the royal family has a key or maybe even a map of their locations. And it turns out they don't. Now, each dorm used to keep their own map for treasure-stealing Ditter, but those are probably not around anymore. But hey, didn't Ferdinand's Ditter notes contain one? So perhaps that might be a good cross-reference. Anyway, what did Det Lind want? To pretty much just be a pain in the ass? It's pretty clear she rubbed Magdalena the wrong way, which means she most likely said remarks similar to what she said to Hortensia, but to a royal's face. Doesn't matter that she's just a third wife. She is still a royal. But would she really put her whole duchy at risk? Well, it is Det Lind, and that means that her remarks might be a danger to Ferdinand, her future husband. So maybe Rosemine could find the Book of Mestianora and use that to get Ferdinand off the hook with the royal family. But then again, maybe this Book of Mestianora she's looking for isn't actually the Grutricite itself. Yeah, there's too much to really worry about right now, so she just needs to focus on transcribing. Inside the archive itself, she asks Schwartz if there's a map of the academy with the shrines. And sure enough, a few actually exist, but they each mark the shrines in a different place. Yeah, not super helpful. But again, she could cross-reference this with Ferdinand's at the dorm, but as she's lost in thought, Sylvester suddenly yanks what she's reading from her hands and tells her it's time to go. He actually has to be the one to pick her up because otherwise, it would be a prince, and that's pretty unacceptable. I mean, Florencia could technically do it too, but there's that whole pregnancy thing. Can't really send her into what's essentially a massive magic tool, as that would mess with the baby. So Sylvester offers her an arm as an escort, and that kinda confuses her. Wait, does Wilfried not escort her at the academy? Not unless it's a special occasion, but apparently Sylvester did so for Florencia at every chance he got. No wonder no one buys their engagement. But as they walk back to the dorm, Rosemine asks Sylvester something pretty important. She wants to know if a magic circle appeared during the Starbind, and Sylvester confirms that it did, and she adds that it was most likely the exact same one that appeared with Det Lind. Yeah, that's why the temple wants a high bishop who can perform old ceremonies, but Sylvester tells her to relax. Her engagement to Wilfried has the king's approval, so she can't be taken so easily, and Sylvester's not planning to cancel it anytime soon. Though she's under no illusion that if she got the Grutricite, that wouldn't hold up at all. From there, she tells him about Det Lind in the archive, and the connection between Georgine and Raublut. If Sylvester plans to let the royal family know about the silver cloth, he might want to do so without Raublut being present, because of said connection. Back in the dorm, she looks over the Ditter map in the bookcase. Leonore notes where the shrine they visited that day was, and how the others appear to be at equidistant points on a circle around the central building. That's pretty handy, and predictable. Now that does remind me, Didn't she find a map like this in Hersher's lab? Oh well, sure it won't come up. But how can she visit all these? She can't exactly wander the grounds during the conference. Well, either way, she figures she'll report her findings tomorrow in the archive. So as soon as she sees Anastasius the next day, she tells him about the shrines, and he heads out with Eglantine to go see them for himself. That way he can tell his father what he actually saw. And while they're gone, Rosamund continues to transcribe. That is until Anastasius and Eglantine arrive back in the archive later, with her looking visibly unwell. But despite her sudden change in health, she asks to speak with Rosamund privately. Pretty obvious where this is going, but Eglantine was able to enter the shrine. She offered so much mana she drained herself, but Anastasius is none the wiser to what happened. What's the deciding factor here? The answer is somewhat obvious in hindsight, but we'll find out how these shrines work this volume. They can't talk about it here, but she invites Rosamund to her villa for tea tomorrow, so it must be pretty damn urgent. Anastasius isn't super happy he's not being included, which causes a bit of a lover spat. He just wants to be in the loop, probably because he's low-key jealous of Rosamund. So as they argue, causing Ottilie to have a panic attack, Magdalena settles it by chastising them both. Anastasius needs to chill and trust his wife, while Eglantine is making these plans much too suddenly that it's causing problems for Rosamund's retainers. So Eglantine apologizes and has to settle this dispute with Anastasius about why he can't listen in before the date is settled. When Sylvester picks her up, he's confused why she's getting an invite and he's not, but chances are this is about a religious matter, or at least that's her excuse. So Sylvester and Anastasius both need to butt out. Yeah, he has to accept that, but at least Eglantine is one of the more trustworthy royals, right? We'll see if you still think that in a few chapters. So she's gonna relay the details to him when she comes back. Speaking of, matters seem to be settled with Anastasius because an invite arrives for 2 days out. She'll be transcribing in the meantime, but that also means she won't have time to go to the shrines in secret. From there, she has Damiel and Angelica investigate where the shrines are at, while Clarissa asks what she plans to do to them. The excuse is cleaning, since she did that before. And that also allows her to thank Clarissa for the magic tool that assisted in that. In the meantime, Ottilie and Lieseletta are struggling to prepare for her visit, because Riarda and Brunhilde did all that before. Yeah, Ottilie is overwhelmed, and marvels that this is what her daily life is like in the Royal Academy. As much as the adults bitch about the trouble she causes, when they see what she does firsthand, they're left in awe of how she pulls it off. Time for her visit with Eglantine, and it's basically what we expected at this point. This is a chat she wanted to have before involving her husband because things will escalate from there. She drops a sound blocker and says that when she visited the shrine, she was sucked inside and found herself having to whirl while offering mana to complete a face stone in Leidenschaft's arms. Yeah, turns out hers wasn't finished. She offered up her mana until she ran out, then drank a rejuvenation potion to keep praying. Goddamn. By the time she was out of potions and mana, the slate still wasn't complete, so she had to leave the shrine without it. Anastasius touched the lock too, but there was zero reaction from him, so he definitely didn't go inside. Wait, so doesn't this sound familiar? The record of a Zent in the archive mentioned circling the academy while praying, so these shrines must be for that purpose. This is exclusively for Zent candidates. However, Rosamund can't play dumb here. She didn't seem surprised by Eglantine's story, so she knows she entered the shrine and most likely got the slate because of how much she prays. Better change the subject then. So her, Anastasius, Sigiswald, and Trauerqual managed to become Zent candidates by activating the magic circle on stage, and the latter three are omni-elemental after their recent rituals. So what's the difference between her and them? Why was she sucked inside? Rosamund informs her it's because of her stop. Turns out a document they found yesterday in the archive explains how the shrines actually work. There are small shrines to the subordinate gods, and one must pray there to gain a face stone to increase their element. Doing the protections ritual after gaining those face stones will actually secure the primary god's protection in turn, which is why previous Zents prayed non-stop during their time at the academy. It was so they could become omni-elemental before obtaining their stops at graduation, because a true Zent candidate has to obtain their divine will from the Garden of Beginnings. That gave them time to earn their elements to be omni-elemental for the Book of Mestianora. Turns out there was a reason the curriculum was the way it was back then. Hold up. Doesn't that mean that Sigiswald can't be a Zent candidate then since he doesn't have the necessary elements? Pretty much. Hildebrand could still become omni-elemental by the time he gets his stop if they revert to the old way of doing it, but now we're talking about waiting until Hildebrand comes of age. Can his father even hold out that long? Or better yet, Sigiswald is already slated to be the next king. If Eglantine or Hildebrand become Zent candidates, war will break out once more. Yeah, that plan to get Sigiswald a massive blessing is backfiring in the worst way. Now it is leagues better than Detlin getting the Grutricite, but it is still a problem. Okay, well, maybe Rosemine could just get it and give it to Sigiswald to save Ferdinand from Arensbach. Since her blue slate was already completed, surely the others will be as easy. Rosemine is probably the closest person in all of Jürgenschmidt to obtain the Grutricite. Though wait, didn't Ferdinand tell her it's in an archive only the royal family can enter? Yeah, on second thought, there's a number of factors that could prevent her from actually obtaining it. Hell, they could just make her marry Sigiswald or flat out kill her for it. Yeah, maybe she should keep all this to herself and just focus on transcribing to find another answer. She's already in way too deep for that to work. The next day when she goes to do transcription work, Eglantine calls her outside. Turns out she and Anastasius want to visit and clean the other shrines today. Oh, that sounds like a great idea. Yeah, she can already tell where this is going. Anastasius doesn't give her a way out either, meaning this is exactly how they're gonna play this shit. They let her use her high beast as they visit the remaining shrines. But along the way, Anastasius gives her a sound blocking magic tool to have a three-way chat. So they're aware she kept secrets from Eglantine during their last meeting, and Rosemine's pretty annoyed that they're forcing her hand, considering both answers wouldn't have been satisfactory. She either would have lied about obtaining the slate, or could have been charged with treason for trying to steal the Grutricite from the royal family. Anastasius orders her to tell him everything, but Rosemine's more frustrated they're basically forcing her into this situation, where she'll have to marry the man whose second marriage she just blessed. Gross. But neither he nor Eglantine care that she doesn't want to leave her family. Her getting the Grutricite and marrying Sigiswald would avoid war in the sovereignty. Why won't Eglantine take it? Because she fears of becoming the cause of another war, and if she became Zent, the greater duchies would all make a move. So basically, they're not thinking of anyone but themselves. Ehrenfest is going to be caught in the crossfire here, but they're a pretty small price to pay for countrywide stability. Both Eglantine and Anastasius view it that way too. So much for being her friend. I mean, if they're going through with this, can they at least return Ferdinand to Ehrenfest? Dude is suffering enough, and Ehrenfest might actually be able to get through all this with him there. But no, they're going to prioritize Arensbach above Ehrenfest. Obviously, without Ferdinand, they would collapse, because he's a central pillar supporting their duchy. So much for treating Ehrenfest like a winning duchy, but they view Arensbach as in a more precarious situation, especially considering Detlin's recent transgressions. But then again, all of that changes if a Zent with the Grutricite is in the picture, because they can break Arensbach up into smaller duchies and assign new archdukes. Those comments Detlin made were enough that she's going to be executed for treason as soon as they have the leeway to do so, which means Ferdinand is as good as dead too. You know, guilt by association and all that crap, which is double ass, considering they forced him into that situation in the first place. So Anastasius gives her the single out that Ferdinand has. Obtain the Grutricite before Ferdinand is married, and they can end his engagement. So with that, Rosemine vows to get the Book of Mestianora and use it as her shield to defend Ferdinand. So there it is. The reason why for 13 volumes, everyone and their mother was telling Rosemine to avoid the royal family. It wasn't just the fact that they can drop undefiable orders, but once they see your value, they'll squeeze it out of you and then toss you aside. Everything Rosemine cares about means nothing to the royal family, and that doubly hurts because she considered these people her friends. And yes, even Eglantine can be cold-blooded when it comes to her own interests. In the meantime, while having this discussion, Rosemine visited every single shrine and prays. The God of Darkness and Goddess of Light shrines both require her to say the names they granted her before giving their tablets, so only Archduke candidates and royals would even have the chance to do this in the first place. But the other god with the gimmick is of course Wigalib. You'll probably notice there's only 6 shrines and not 7 for the primary gods. That's because the Life Shrine actually contains a miniature shrine inside it for Geduld. Also, she hadn't filled up his slate, so she actually has to pray and offer mana for it. And as she completes more shrines, the lights in the sky grow with each divine color she adds. And after getting the last slate and all the words necessary, Flute Rane tells her to go obtain the book. Cool. But how exactly? No clue. But she expended a lot of mana and stamina circling the academy for this crap. So she chugs a potion and heads back to the archive when she suddenly notices something pretty damn important. After getting that last slate, her stop capacity actually feels like it's grown. She could probably actually go back to compressing her mana like she had previously. She tells that to Anastasius and Eglantine, who muse that there might still be hope for Sigiswald yet. Which is a long shot. Chances are he would need to visit the smaller shrines, redo his protections ritual, then visit the Garden of Beginnings, and then actually start circling the shrines proper. That's time he doesn't have. They take off into the sky to get back to the archive, and that's when Rosemine notices that the colored lines she's seeing are actually a massive magic circle above the academy grounds. Yeah, something big is about to happen, but we won't find out what it is for about 2 more books. But no, that's when the series ramps up to 11. Turns out Anastasius did all this in secret without his father's knowledge. Now that they've visited all the shrines, he's gonna inform the king and figure out their next steps after they drop Rosemine off at the archive. But when they get there, Weiss walks up to Rosemine from his usual spot outside the barrier. He takes her hand and tells her to follow him. That's a surprise to everyone else there. But Anastasius urges her on because this is likely the next step to obtaining the Grutricite. Hildebrand was in the archive, but Schwartz kicked him out, so now it's empty inside. That is until Weiss drags her in there. That's when the barrier turns opaque so no one can see. They guide her to the back wall and tell her to touch it. That's when a magic circle appears, and a new doorway opens up. The Shoemills guide her down the path to yet another doorway, but this one has a complex magic circle on it. They tell her to touch it, and it seems like she's actually about to obtain the Grutricite, but the magic circle rejects her hand, and she's pushed back. The 2 Shoemills look up and tell her she's not registered, so she can't enter. Suddenly she remembers what Ferdinand told her during her 2nd year, that the Grutricite was in an archive only the royal family could enter. She could never actually obtain it because she doesn't share their blood. So how is she gonna save Ferdinand now? It's gonna take her at least 3 years before she marries Sigiswald and gets registered as a royal who can get past this door. She doesn't have that kind of time. Ferdinand's gonna marry Detlinde next year, and then he's gonna be executed. Suddenly, she lashes out and starts smacking the door to get it to open. The magic circle's rejections just get stronger and stronger, starting to leave visible burns on her skin. But Rosemine just doesn't care. Her charms from Ferdinand are being used up one after another, and that's what finally snaps her out of it. Those are precious cargo. Ferdinand's gone, so once those are destroyed, she's not getting them back. Schwartz and Weiss deem her a danger and say she must be eliminated. Their face stones start to light up to attack her, but she tells them that she's gonna leave. When they get back to the main archive, they close the door, and Weiss exits the barrier, turning it translucent once again. Everyone's shocked, and Anastasius rushes in to ask her what happened. She explains that she was rejected for not being a royal. Yeah, that sucks. But when he sees that her hand is bleeding, he's shocked. He tells her to leave the archive to go get healed, but she won't have any of that. She grabs a hold of him and asks what's gonna happen to Ferdinand if she can't get the Grutricite in time. Her panic is actually causing her eyes to change color, but Anastasius doesn't really see the issue. She isn't married to him, nor is he her family, so why does she care about him so much? But she explains that he is like family to her, so it matters. Yeah, it turns out he pushed her a bit too hard. That was mostly just empty threats to get her motivated. So Anastasius takes her hand to heal her injury, while explaining Detlinde won't be punished until Arnsbach is stabilized. So basically after they obtain the Grutricite, her Letizia comes of age and marries Hildebrand. In the meantime though, they'll overlook helping Ferdinand maneuver into a position where he avoids punishment. And knowing Ferdinand, he's probably already doing that. Alright, now that that's settled, Anastasius clarifies the situation. Because she can't attain the Grutricite, her value for them just plummeted, and she's no longer in danger. Well, that's news to her, but basically they're not going to take her into the royal family. Turns out they've been talking to Sylvester about her behind the scenes, so if she wants to know what's being discussed, she'd best ask him. With that, he drops her off outside the archive with her retainers, and they ask what exactly happened. But this is something that really shouldn't be made public, because it would wreak havoc among the upper-ranked duchies. And after seeing Magdalena gesture to keep her quiet, she'll just leave it at that, because getting involved with the greater duchies leads to this kind of crap in the first place. Hildebrand keeps pushing her for information here because, well, he also wants the Grutricite. That way he can end his and her engagement, and then the 2 of them can get married. Or so he thinks. But his mother keeps him reined in. Why is that? Well, because she knows that he has a crush on her and knows that no good will come from it. So she better put a stop to it. As Rosemine gets back to work, she suddenly recalls in Dunkelfelger's history book that they had a king that came from their duchy. How is that possible? A very long and complicated story that won't come to light for about 3 more volumes, as Jürgenschmidt has had its fair share of succession crises before. Either way, there has to be another way to obtain the Grutricite, or else a king wouldn't have come from Dunkelfelger. Or I guess maybe some later generation could have put that check in place. But she's pulled from her thoughts by Hannelore pointing at her sleeve. Yeah, Anastasius healed her, but there is still blood on it. And that realization floors Hannelore. Royals don't heal people because every bit of their mana should be going towards the country. The fact he did so was basically his way of apologizing. At the end of the day, Sylvester comes to get her and they have a brief chat on their way back to the dorm. She asks him point blank if she's in danger like Anastasia said, and they'll have to talk about that later. She then tells him that today made her painfully aware why everyone wanted her to avoid the royal family at all costs, and Sylvester looks drained at this point. Not only is she slow on the uptake, it's already too late. Inside the dorm, Hersher is there for once. She has a box from Ferdinand that has a little something for everyone. Letters for Sylvester and Rosemine, even some ingredients, and probably a mountain of research documents to bribe Hersher into delivering that box now, rather than waiting until winter. So what's this research about? The library's magic tools, of course. Ferdinand made progress in splitting up the functions, so one can make more specialized designs. Wow, Rosemine wants that, but Hersher says she can simply wait until winter to look over it. Sylvester then hands Rosemine her letter, which makes her hesitate for a second. Ferdinand wouldn't use the invisible ink, right? Also, can she even write back to him? Well, yeah, it's fine to write letters, but because Sylvester is anticipating his letter to be packed with headache-inducing news, they delay their meeting until tomorrow. We pretty much only ever think about Rosemine getting information from Ferdinand, but Sylvester gets his fair share too. It's one of those details you don't really realize until it's mentioned. Inside her hidden room, she takes a look at the letter in question. She can't really write the response she wants to without shining ink, so that's gonna have to wait until after the conference. In the meantime though, Ferdinand's letter is pretty bold. Because so many are away for the conference, he could actually write a letter that's pretty unhindered, and prefaces it with that warning, essentially telling her not to respond so openly like he's writing. Ferdinand's first question is asking why she hasn't written to him in such a long while. And that's kind of a frustrating thing to ask. She wants to, but she can't act so friendly anymore because she's finally starting to look her age. She starts immediately writing a response voicing her frustrations, which is basically wasted paper, because it's not like she can actually send that letter. It's too open and wouldn't make it past the checks. But back to what Ferdinand wrote, the nobles of Arensbach did spring prayer too. Not just him. He managed to gather some pretty rare ingredients as a result, and sent her some to make charms. Apparently these flowers are ideal, which is great because, you know, she used so many today. But this, of course, comes with a pretty big ask. He needs her to send over 300 sheets of maximal quality Fey paper. I want to clarify, maximal quality is not arbitrary in this context. Ferdinand drilled it into her head, and she knows that it means of the highest quality possible. Luckily, they just finished researching paper with Juanchel over winter. What's he asking this for? Honestly, there's zero indication yet, but after Volume 7, the answer's pretty obvious. And the rest of his letter details his exit strategy to avoid Detlin's blunder. Aside from the paper, he requires some Fey stones and Fey Beast leather from his workshop. If I didn't know any better, it sounds like he's making a book. And with so many magic ingredients, I wonder what book he's making. Their Trombe stock won't even cover this request, so she'll have to source some new paper from Ilgner, and as a reward for this, Ferdinand will send her some more fish. Cool. The next part of this letter gets a lot more serious. Why did she revive that ancient ceremony for the Starbind? Ferdinand finally tells her what the hell's been going around the Archduke Conference, since Sylvester hasn't told her yet, and Heartmoon and Clarissa are too busy with Dunkelfelger to notice. Apparently, the Sovereign Temple is convinced pretty much every other duchy out there to petition the king to make Rosemine the Sovereign High Bishop, so she can go around and whip the country's temples into shape with proper ceremonies. That Starbind really did come back to bite her in the ass, because Sylvester's facing a ton of pressure to end his adoption so she can be taken by the Sovereign Temple, all because she showed everyone the benefit of religious ceremonies in the first place. And the Sovereign Temple wants to use this to find more Zent candidates. Of course, Arensbach had one, so it stood to reason more would crop up. Georgine is working in the shadows, saying by getting nobles to participate, they can increase their divine protections, and how unfair it is that Ehrenfest is monopolizing this knowledge, basically trying to get her out of Ehrenfest too like she did Ferdinand. But this is clearly a losing battle, because public support is behind her joining the Sovereign Temple for the country's sake. At this point, you should be getting the impression that pretty much every positive thing Rosemine does for this country gets turned around on her and used to ruin her life. It was stated all the way back in part 1, but nobles will use someone without care, and that holds true regardless of status. But aside from that, they've also refused the Lanzenov princess, so Ferdinand expects negotiations to suck this spring when they visit, though I guess it is still better than having accepted the princess in the first place. Detlind was bitching up a storm about a rude woman in the academy, and they're struggling quite a bit to restrain Georgine. Sounds like a pain. But if Rosamine joined the temple like is being suggested, it would allow her to restrain the royals and help the king find a proper Zen, which would relieve his burden. But on the flip side of that, a royal decree cannot cancel her adoption. She, Karstedt, and Sylvester would need to agree. However, they can use one to cancel her engagement and force her to marry somebody else. For that reason, she needs to not refuse the royals when they request stuff of her. But Ferdinand tells her to find a reason to buy time, at least a year. Why a year specifically? Well, we aren't really given a reason, but she's likely to find herself in a similar situation to what he was in. He then gives her some advice to buy time, but Rosamine already knows it won't do much. That night, she asks Clarissa if she thinks she'll be moved to the Sovereign Temple, and Clarissa says that Ehrenfest can't afford to lose her. But that's not what Rosamine is asking. As somebody from Dunkelfelger, what's her perspective as an outsider? This is the chance of a lifetime to curry favor with the winning duchies and royal family. I mean, they would need to discuss terms like how long this is gonna last, but it's a no-brainer to sacrifice a single Archduke candidate for that much influence nationwide. However, now that she's in Ehrenfest in person, she knows the dire straits of the duchy. And with that insight, Rosamine understands a bit of what Sylvester's been going through now. We basically got the whole picture now of what they're facing. Rosamine's actions did secure Ehrenfest a better spot, but their internals prevent them from properly capitalizing on it. Further, it would ruin her life and what she wants, so it's a pretty bad situation. Worst part is, it's being decided without her input, and against Sylvester's wishes too. So, how are they gonna weasel out of it? The next day after dinner, she has her meeting with Sylvester and Florencia. She hands over her letter and the one that Ferdinand sent, while informing him that she's aware of the talk that's been going around the conference. He doesn't plan to cancel her engagement or send her to the sovereignty, but Rosamine doubts he'll have much choice. While the king has accepted Sylvester's logic, Sigiswald was apparently in agreement with the other duchies. Wait, when did this happen? Probably before Anastasius told them she's a Zent candidate and close to obtaining the Gurtrasite. And speaking of, Sylvester got an invitation for a meeting 2 days out. His plan is to turtle up and just wait out the Archduke conference, because Archduke candidates can only be moved through marriage. Yeah, about that. She hands a sound blocker to him and Karstedt, and says it's up to them whether they include Florencia. This is probably going to be a shock and not good for her baby, so they need to consider it. Also, maybe clear the room too. That's when she drops the bombshell that she's not only a Zent candidate, but probably the one closest to obtaining the Gurtrasite in the entire country. Why is he only just now hearing about this? Well, it did just happen yesterday. Sylvester won't be able to ignore the pressure this time around, because her engagement is going to be cancelled for sure. In 3 years' time, she'll be moved to the sovereignty unless the royals can get the book before then. They briefly discuss summoning Wilfried to tell him this news, but it's for the best that he doesn't learn. He would probably just cause a scene in the academy, and his retainers would probably leak the information back home. There's a pretty heartfelt moment here, where Sylvester says he'll do his best, but he's also painfully aware of his position. He's an archduke of a fairly small player on the country stage. Things probably won't go as well as they hope. And she replies that she hasn't forgotten all that he's done for her family, and that she's always tried to live up to her role as his adopted daughter. As long as he keeps protecting those she cares about, she will follow his orders as the Archduke. Part 5 gives us something I didn't really know I wanted in this story by fleshing out the relationship between Sylvester and Rosamine. They've always had an understanding, but now that Ferdinand is gone, the two can show a father-daughter bond. Because while Sylvester accepted Rosamine as his daughter from the very beginning, the two just really didn't have that much chance to interact in part 3 and 4. We're finally getting a chance to see that, and it's nice. They bring Florencia up to speed now that the more private talk is over, and they have to lay out their counterattack. Eglantine and Anastasius want to avoid a war between the greater duchies by putting Sigiswald on the throne with her as his third wife. But she has no idea what Sigiswald and Trauerqual want, so since they don't know the entire royal family's endgame, she takes a page from Benno's playbook and decides to squeeze the royal family for as much as they're worth. For Ehrenfest's sake, of course. The royals already demonstrated they won't show Ehrenfest any consideration, so they need to figure this out for themselves. They lay out the conditions they won't budge on, but Rosamine for sure wants books, no limit to her retainers, and if she does end up in the temple, to be treated as an Archduke candidate rather than a shrine maiden. But above all, she tells Sylvester that the royal family will likely just state their intentions, but that doesn't mean they can't negotiate. They'll cooperate, but only if this is a mutually beneficial exchange. And after one more day of rest, she's finally back in the underground archive. Annalora and Hildebrand are happy to see she's well, since she did have a fever for a bit there, and use that as an excuse for her to get a day off. But Magdalena is eyeing her pretty closely. Once they start transcribing though, Hildebrand approaches her and asks if she's gonna obtain the Grutricite. Yeah, he took this chance to bring this up when his mother and Hannelore were taking a break. Okay, so it's abundantly clear now. The whole royal family knows she's a Zent candidate, but as he's saying he wants to help her, his mother swoops in and drags him out of the archive for a scolding. But after lunch, Sigiswald arrives and tells everyone besides Rosemine to go take a break. They can have a nice, private chat behind the sound-blocking barrier there. But she does confirm that she's not going to be executed for her bluntness coming up, because Sigiswald's the one who wants a frank discussion. This dude had no clue what he was walking into. Sigiswald, to this point, has seemed like a pretty okay dude, I guess, but here we're finding out just how bad his tunnel vision is. And in a side story later, we're gonna see he's an irredeemable douchebag. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Rosemine taking him to Benno's School of Hard Knocks. So he broaches the subject that it's known that she's a Zen candidate, and that while she's close to obtaining the Grutricite, she still needs to be registered as a royal first. That Starbind ceremony actually kinda backfired on the royal family. While they hoped that it would establish Sigiswald as the next Zent, it actually just made the country clamor for a true Zent to be found. The royal family assumed that she would get the Grutricite, and that would pretty much solve it. But she failed. Thus she directs them to have Eglantine go get it instead. But that won't work, because Sigiswald elaborates on why they don't have time. A foundational magic tool in the sovereignty has collapsed. That might not sound like that big of a deal, but that means a building crumbled. Despite the building itself being described as unimportant, the mana shortage has gotten so bad they're neglecting various unused or unnecessary magic tools. And as a result of that, a foundation running dry and breaking apart sends a message to the nobility as a whole that the current royal family is failing in their job. Yikes. Yeah, they can't let generations old magic tools crumble because of them, so they're working twice as hard to fill any that they find that look like they're running low. So what's he saying? They want Sylvester to end her adoption and have Traurqual adopt her right away so she can register and get the Grutricite for them now. Then after that, she can marry Sigiswald when she comes of age as his third wife. Isn't that the best future? Not really. Rosemine still doesn't want to marry the dude whose wedding she just blessed. But Sigiswald continues by saying the offers they gave Sylvester to get him to consider this request. Things they saw as incredibly reasonable, like raise Ehrenfest's rank, give them preferential treatment, and have Ehrenfest send more nobles to the sovereignty. I've talked about this a ton already, but this is what I mean when I say the royal family doesn't know how to deal with middle and lesser duchies. A greater duchy would love to send more nobles to the sovereignty, because that means more influence. But for a middle duchy with a low population just coming out of a purge like Ehrenfest, that's the same as crippling their ability to govern. So they're troubled that Ehrenfest is refusing those terms, but Rosemine explains they're already struggling to keep up with their rank. Hell, Anastasius just scolded them at the Interduchy tournament about it, but Ehrenfest strikes the royals as having ambition. Why else would they try to climb the ranks? But behind the scenes, they're a mess, who wants to lower their rank rather than raise it. Then she tells them about the purge, cutting their already small noble population even further. So they would be poaching what little talent Ehrenfest has left by sending nobles to the sovereignty. Jürgen Schmidt might be suffering a mana shortage, but that could be fixed by pretty much anyone. So Rosemine can't just pick up and leave her duchy on such short notice. She explains she's in charge of printing, like, actually in charge, not just her guardians, and that she's also the High Bishop. She would need to do extensive handover work, figure out what personnel she can even take, and then the fact that her engagement to Wilfried is stabilizing their internal politics. She's a goddamn linchpin, more so than Ferdinand even was. So how is she going to be able to do all that? How about a year's worth of mana in exchange for the time to sort out her affairs? Wait, how the hell is she going to do that? Rosemine might have a lot of mana, but she doesn't have that much. But she says just hold another dedication ritual for the Obs and their retainers, so they can experience the ceremonies they wish to. Sigiswald is short-circuiting at this point, like Ferdinand used to, but she's insistent. They can schedule it for the last day. That'll give them the mana they need. Hell, involve the Sovereign Temple too. That way they can use the small chalices to store the mana. But they can't just amend the schedule with so many nobles involved. That would be a nightmare. That's when she hits him hard. Putting aside the fact that he wanted her to change her life at the drop of a hat, wasn't Sigiswald also the one who wanted her to join the Sovereign Temple in the first place to get ceremonies more accepted, and thus raise the mana levels through protections? Well, this is doing that. Damn, dude just played himself accidentally. Changing the conference schedule is easier than her adjusting her entire life for the royal family's selfish desires. Everything Sigiswald has come at her with so far is only what the royals want: mana, her adoption, and educating duchies. But not a single one of those is what Ehrenfest wants. So while they seem willing to accommodate by talking to her, he is yet to actually offer her anything of value. Sigiswald says the year that she's trying to get would be what she wants, because she's the one who needs it, not them. Oh really? So everything's in order on their end? Baptized royals get villas, retainer candidates, furniture, she's gonna need quarters for the retainers moving with her, sovereign capes and brooches, probably a shit ton more she can't even remember offhand. Well, she's got him again. The plan was for her to live with his mother, or him. Damn, and Sylvester's the one who's been getting a bad rap as a cruel adoptive father? Every point he brings up, she just shoves right back in his face in the worst way possible. Dude can't even counter. Anyway, if they want to solve this mana crisis, Klausenberg has already offered to make the dedication ritual a yearly occurrence at the Academy. They could do the same for the Archduke Conference too. Sigiswald is practically terrified by this point at her suggestions and verbal smackdown, but she throws in the means to entice the noble population. Yearly rituals will encourage nobles to repeat their divine protections about every decade or so to increase their mana. But also, since this is for education, the royals won't actually need to participate themselves. But as he thinks the discussion is winding down and is exhausted, he says he understands why their nobles are struggling to keep up with their new rank. But that was just getting them on the same page in negotiating time. She didn't even touch what it would take for her to accept this adoption in the first place. Damn, bro got played again. After some explaining, Sigiswald finally understands that Rosemine has a boatload of duties back home. So this year was literally just time to prepare, and not an actual benefit. Just the bare minimum for this discussion to even take place. From here on, this is purely her own opinions and not actual negotiations. This will have to be decided by Sylvester, which puts the prince at ease somewhat, remembering this isn't the final say. But this is also her way of letting them write off her asks without holding her to account. The dedication ritual was just some clever wordplay to make Sigiswald go along with it, and now it's pretty much settled in stone. She wants Ferdinand returned to Ehrenfest as compensation, as that would pretty much solve all of their problems, but Sigiswald says they can't. He's too involved in Arnsbach and literally keeping it afloat right now. Okay, well, she kind of expected that. Then she at least wants to secure his safety above all else. So she says can they delay his marriage until she gets the Grutricite? But they can't do that either since it would jeopardize Letizia's status as an Archduke candidate. Yeah, that stupid law from Arnsbach comes back into play. Apparently the king suggested they end it to the previous awe, but he didn't do it by the time of his passing. And as it stands, the king cannot annul laws in duchies. She has a very short window to be adopted to keep her status, between the Starbind on the first day of the conference and the Ob confirmations on the last. That gives Rosemine less than a year to secure his safety. So is that okay? Well, she can't really say, considering Ferdinand told her to wait a year, but in the meantime, she would like him to receive a hidden room at least for his sanity. That's a weird request, but they could actually make that one happen. While that's beyond normal since he's staying as a guest, his situation itself is abnormal, since he's dedicating mana and running the duchy before his marriage. Besides, a year delay in marriage would normally allow him to cancel his engagement, but he can't due to the royal decree. Okay, Sigiswald will argue her case to get it approved then. I want to say, Rosemine is threatening Sigiswald in this scene with an emotional rampage should Ferdinand be harmed due to royal inaction. So this confirms that she's not only dangerous, but also not really fit to rule the country. So from there, she addresses the things that'll actually help Ehrenfest. She wants the king to institute a 5-year embargo on nobles marrying out of Ehrenfest. Every marriage will mean that people move there instead to help out with their manpower shortage. Florencia suggested that, and Sigiswald says it'll most likely be approved. Then she asks for 30 to 40 magic tools for newborns to help the former Veronica faction kids, and people in their duchy have more children, which is a pretty big ask, but Sigiswald can actually see that getting approved as well. She also wants them to make the sovereign nobles from Ehrenfest return home temporarily, that way she can get them up to speed and meet them in person. That's actually the first common sense thing she said, and one that the royal family is actually pushing for themselves. The fact that Ehrenfest nobles don't want to is the problem, so they'll get that approved too. In fact, that's why they wanted to accept more nobles from Ehrenfest in the first place. That way she can build her faction in the sovereignty. Next comes some of her personal asks. Her underage namesworn need to come with her, which is weird that she has people she's responsible for, but they no longer have parents to even ask in the first place. She holds more authority in their lives than anyone else. But ultimately, the royals have to ask the Ob for details before approving it. You know what her last condition's gonna be? A goddamn library. That makes Sigiswald shut down. An entire library? Is she serious? Yeah, she is. Ferdinand gave her one, so she bets the first prince and future king have a whole treasure trove ready. Suddenly, Sigiswald is questioning his life choices, but decides to leave that discussion to his father, and that actually does bring their talk to an end. finally. It is pretty funny that their biggest conditions for her being adopted actually align with the royal interests. It's just that they're so used to dealing with greater duchies, their methods for accomplishing that were never actually considered. But hey, it's time to go see how things went on Sylvester's end. He's the one who had the final say. So she tells Sylvester what went down with Sigiswald, how the royals thought they were being considerate with their offers, there's definitely room to negotiate, and they'll hold another dedication ritual to buy time. Yeah, he's annoyed that the royals tried to go behind his back to do all this crap, but praises Rosemine for throwing the ball back in his court, because in the end, it is Sylvester's call. And 2 days later, he's meeting with the royal family again, but when he gets back, he grills Rosemine on exactly what she said. Apparently her harsh tone and veiled threats wounded Sigiswald somewhat, making Sylvester have to cover for her, because she wouldn't threaten a prince, would she? Well, she did, and she admits that. Oh well, in the end, all of her conditions were met. Well, except one. Trowerqual asked that she not try to bankrupt the country by asking for a library. Damn, that's the one thing she didn't want to budge on, but Sylvester threw it out immediately. The royals were pretty divided on how to deal with her. Trowerqual thinks that whoever obtains the Grutricite is the rightful Zent, and their job would be to clear the path for them to take the throne. Literally 0 requests and just give up power. Her wanting a villa seems pretty absurd to him because she should just be taking the royal palace as the next queen, while he's the one who should move to a villa. Also, he only offered to take nobles from Ehrenfest so Rosemine could build a faction and install people she trusts. That's why they were so confused that Ehrenfest refused. Now, Sigiswald doesn't think the Grutricite is actually enough, because she wouldn't be able to get the greater duchies to fall in line. And by the sounds of it, Trowerqual wouldn't be much help there. Dude's basically just washing his hands of this crap as soon as he can. Which is why Sigiswald believes she should be marrying into the royal family after her adoption, so someone can be there to guide her, I guess. Anastasia's had pretty much the worst opinion of everyone. Basically, if they can't take the Grutricite from her, just lock her ass in the library to pacify her, and only cart her out to use the Grutricite when it's needed. That's an insult to the next Zent, so Trowerqual wasn't happy, and told Anastasius to shut his mouth. But even Rosemine admits that she would probably only cause chaos if put in charge, so Anastasius isn't entirely wrong. But at this point, the royals are pretty drained. Sigiswald went into his discussion with her expecting a civilized chat with a noblewoman, only to face a cutthroat merchant who shoved his inadequacy in his face for not being on the same page as Ehrenfest, and subsequently made him second guess how people view the royal family. Serves him and his bookless ass right. But the decision is basically made at this point. Ehrenfest's conditions were accepted, so the royal family will do the dedication ritual to buy them a year. Sigiswald will use that time to find the Grutricite himself, and if he doesn't, Rosemine will be adopted in, get it, and marry him upon coming of age. If he does find it though, Ferdinand will still be given his hidden room and not punished along with Det Lind as payment for their help in the archive. Ferdinand's been spared at least. Well, spared from the royal family. There are 7 books left in this series, so some drama's definitely on the horizon. But this next year is gonna be hell. They have to do a ton of handover work, and that all starts with a huge family meeting as soon as they're back. How is Wilfried gonna take this news? Honestly, it's gonna be an emotional explosion, but Sylvester wants to know her thoughts on him now that they're not engaged. And honestly, she doesn't really feel anything. They hadn't done any of the usual rituals of courtship. Hell, they even decided not to mix colors until they were older. So it was basically just a king-approved verbal agreement, and now Sigiswald has just replaced Wilfried on that front. But she does recognize the impact this will have on Wilfried's future. While Sylvester feels bad about how his son is bound to be treated without Rosemine's protection, he'll just have to support him as a father. After the dedication ritual is formally announced, Rosemine is back in the archive transcribing with Anna Laura. Dunkelfelger is actually participating in this one, which seems a bit odd, but she explains they're interested in other rituals too. Not that she can participate, since she's not even supposed to be there. Hildebrand is upset that he can't either, but his mother scolds him for being selfish. Arnsbach declined because Ferdinand can teach them, or so they say, but we find out that Det Lind claims that they can repeat the protections ritual whenever they want as soon as she's Zent, and that was her official response to the royal family. It's a damn good thing she saved Ferdinand then. Back in the dorm, Hersher gives Rosemine a down payment with the list of ingredients to brew the library's magic tools, and announces that she'll participate in the dedication ritual as well. The professors couldn't during winter due to it being student research, so the scholars course is especially excited. But Hersher does point out a massive flaw in their bait. Divine protections are a pretty good reason to get participation, but those duchies who go first will see the lowest returns on their investment for at least a decade. meaning they'll probably get frustrated and kick up a fuss over a yearly occurrence. And the losing duchies will most likely be the first round to repeat their ritual. Rosemine has a solution to tide them over though. She can throw in another ritual, how to enrich their gathering spots like Ironfest does. Hersher gives her a heads up that the academy curriculum is changing too. They're gonna move Stop Acquisition back to the 3rd year, after the Divine Protections ritual like she suggested. Rosemine has the royal family's ear, so she best be careful or else they might just take her for themselves. A bit late on that, but they can't tell Hersher yet. Professors initially bitched about the changes, but Frau Larn proved they can revert back pretty quickly, since she pulled that stunt in Rosemine's 2nd year by using older lesson material. And also, as Ferdinand predicted, Klausenberg has pushed forward with their yearly academy dedication ritual, and is helping the royal family prepare for this one so they can learn the process in time for winter. Rosemine spends the remaining time with her usual routine, until it's finally time for the dedication ritual. She meets up with Emmanuel once again, and he's very smug for some reason, saying how pleased he is that she'll be joining the Sovereign Temple as the High Bishop soon enough. Hartmut verbally smacks him upside his head, saying she's an Ehrenfest Archduke candidate, so she can't join the temple, and dude already knows this. Ferdinand explained it to him back in Volume 7 of Part 4. But for some reason, that smugness of his keeps up, because apparently, he heard there is a way for an Archduke candidate to move to the sovereignty. Too bad he doesn't realize it's through marriage, because that would actually bar her from entering the temple. But he's expecting Ehrenfest to receive a royal decree soon enough, meaning he's so far out of the loop it's not even funny. And Hartmut claps back at that, suggesting that the royal family might just take her for themselves. Rosemine tells Emmanuel to make sure the nobles are all set up for the ritual, and he raises a complaint. Apparently they're not facing the altar, because this dumbass assumes this is a normal dedication ritual. Yeah, this man is not going to the gods, it's going to the royal family. Not sure if he was actually told that, but who the fuck cares? He's a priest. Hell, she's not even using her stop here. They're using the actual divine instruments. She then tells him just that. Because the Sovereign Temple poached all the talent across the country, most duchies are struggling with their harvests. So she shoos him away, and is basically mentally exhausted from that exchange. There's a ton on her mind, and Emmanuel is just a draining dude to talk to. Soon enough, they head in, and knock out the dedication ritual like it's nothing. Or she would've. Emmanuel wants to serve as the high priest, but she shoots him down. We're talking about a bunch of archdukes and archnobles participating. A bunch of measly blue priests could actually die trying, so she tells him to have all the temple people stand back and watch. Daniel is serving as the canary in the coal mine for this by standing at the outer edge, and calling out to end it like Charlotte usually does. The royals are overlooking it, and a good chunk of sovereign nobles are actually participating as well. Even Magdalena is getting in on it, but the Knight's Order from every duchy is standing on the edge to watch too. There are 2 large chalices and a bunch of small ones to store the mana. Now the sovereignty actually doesn't have Giebs, and instead the land is enriched by the royal family serving that same purpose. So that's how spring prayer is done here in the sovereignty. The Zen thanks those who are participating and they offer their mana. And unlike with her stop, there isn't a pillar of light, only the Academy's divine instrument shines. Soon enough, Daniel calls out to stop, and a bunch of the blue robes collapse, which is hilarious. But the archdukes are all just fine. Hell, even their retainers are mostly fine too. But Rosemine wraps this up by telling them the purpose of the dedication ritual back home, and how if they offer mana, their harvest will increase, while also giving them divine protections. That's when Trauerqual says this will become a yearly thing, and those participating will get to repeat their protections ritual. But Klausenberg and Ehrenfest will be doing one in the academy too, to help their students learn the importance of prayer. Wait, did they actually agree to that? I guess they did now. Some are looking to her, hoping for some of those amazing rejuvenation potions they heard about. But Rosemine instead tells them the prayer to replenish their gathering spots. If they channel their mana into the magic circles at them while praying, it'll make their ingredients better. But while teaching them, she throws in a bit of extra mana into the chalice to secure her year of time. But that does actually change the mana in it from red to green, and people noticed. And with that, the Archduke Conference comes to a close. But on the way out, Rosemine has the adults replenish the gathering spot for some extra practice with religious ceremonies, which is great because that means they'll manage once she leaves. That's pretty important with her impending move next year, but other than that, this was a hell of an Archduke conference. Things spiraled out of control as we knew they would, but still somehow managed to exceed expectations. The epilogue picks up from Hildebrand's perspective. He's having dinner with his mother after the conference. He's eager to know how the ritual went and asks for details, like if she saw the red pillar of light. But no. Rosemine even speculated it was because she didn't use her stop, or maybe it was because it was a winter ritual done in spring. Who knows? But either way, Magdalena was still impressed with the feeling she got performing it. She goes on to say that no nobles collapsed, but the temple got what they deserved, since they become way too cocky for their own good after rituals started yielding results. So their humiliation was a nice bit of punishment. After dinner though, he and his mother moved to a private chat, where he asks if they succeeded in establishing Rosemine's value to the whole country, so they can justify her adoption as a royal. And they did. Even forgetting the whole Grutricite business, Rosemine belongs in the sovereignty. Ehrenfest can't monopolize her any longer, and they showed why exactly with that ritual. Hildebrand is curious if they're really doing this. I mean, it does mean ending Rosemine's engagement after all. And yeah, they are. Now, Wilfried could have actually joined Rosemine apparently, but Ehrenfest lacks the manpower, and Sylvester refused the thought. Wilfried probably wouldn't have been able to keep up, and their duchy's rank means Rosemine would need to marry a higher ranked individual to solidify power anyway. When they proposed the idea of Rosemine serving as the sovereign high bishop originally, Hartmut was the one who stepped up to refuse that offer, as everyone else was silent. He said that the first Zent was a high bishop, so the royal family should send one of their own to learn the temple's ways, throwing Hildebrand under the bus in the process. Was he really going to have to endure the temple as well as Arnsbach? Magdalena won't let that happen. Hildebrand then complains about his engagement to Letizia, but she shuts that down too. She'll clean up this Detlinde mess before Hildebrand comes of age. Now, it's pretty clear that he's head over heels for Rosemine. Magdalena speaks from experience that Ehrenfest Archduke candidates are no good. Ferdinand should have been the one to keep Detlinde on a short leash, and the fact that he didn't stop her means that he's a failure of a man. Now, while he seems like the perfect partner on paper, he's deeply flawed at understanding people, but the fact that Rosemine wants to secure his safety shocked Magdalena to her core. She assumed that Sylvester was the only one who could have cared that deeply about Ferdinand. Putting that aside though, Hildebrand cannot become Zent like he wishes. He doesn't have the training or elements. Besides, Jürgen Schmidt won't wait for him to be old enough anyway. If Rosemine is adopted and obtains the Grutricite, she will become Zent. But if Hildebrand becomes a Zent candidate as well, it would divide the country in another civil war. Anyway, with the updated curriculum, he wouldn't even get the chance to obtain his Stab in time. But she tries to explain that that's a net benefit for him, even if he doesn't think so. I think it's worth pointing out that the reason the royals freaked out that Ferdinand was supposedly looking for the Grutricite is that he's an unknown factor. The royals have time to prepare for Rosemine, but also they're accepting her into their family. That means they can rein her in and they know she's not going to cause harm. Also, that whole ticking clock thing means beggars can't be choosers, right? Hildebrand returns to his usual routine and training with Raublut after the conference, but after seeing how sloppy his swordsmanship is, Raublut calls for a break. They should sort out his mental state before continuing. Well, he can't really talk about his troubles to even Raublut, and asks instead what are Slofdraum's flowers. Raublut damn near chokes on his tea, but Hildebrand explains he heard Hortensia ask Detlinde about them. They can only be found in Arnsbach, so what are they like? Raublut adopts a very noble smile to hide his emotions and brushes it off. But isn't he from Gillessenmeyer? Yeah, his scar seems to have something to do with the story why he knows about them, but explains they were the favorite of the lady of the villa that he served at after coming of age. But what's really bothering Hildebrand? Well, I guess it comes down to his Stab. He wants it as soon as possible, but Raublut laughs it off, because honestly, he could go get one whenever he wants, because he's a royal. He can actually open the door himself. Arthur is shocked that he would even suggest that, but Raublut punctuates it by saying that his father changed it for Hildebrand's interest, so he probably should obey. It's how Hildebrand can obtain the best Stab possible. So does that mean that Hildebrand should obtain new elements and compress his mana? Yeah, of course. And Raublut will talk to his father should he do so enough ahead of time. He then hands Hildebrand a box containing the new learning material sent over from Ehrenfest. Those will help him learn the gods' names, and also why Ehrenfest's grades improved so much. Now that he has a path forward, Hildebrand is resolved, and they get back to training. Well, there's certainly a lot of hidden context there as we see that Raublut and these flowers run deep. But where is this going? We won't get a full picture for a while, but things will heat up over the next few books. Before that, however, we've got some really impactful side stories to get through. First up is an unwanted marriage from Adolfina's perspective. Right after Ortwin talked to Wilfried at the end of Volume 3, she gets an emergency family meeting request with him and her parents. Obviously, this is about her future as Sigiswald's wife. Yeah, seems like she's actually been kept in the dark by the royal family, unlike Eglantine was, but she knows that Rosemine did actually speak to Eglantine. Her hope is that Lind is gonna be the next Zent, and she can cancel her engagement to Sigiswald because the dude's a self-absorbed jackass. She's only marrying him because her father views it as a benefit. You know, tying Druanchel to the royal family. So when she asks Ortwind, he drops the less than thrilling news that Lind isn't qualified, and this won't affect her marriage. That sucks. While she voices her complaints, her father chastises her, but she's very open about her dissatisfaction with this arrangement. From her father's perspective, she'll be the most powerful woman in the country, but from hers, she's being forced to marry a spoiled brat who's too arrogant to actually realize his own inadequacies. Fucking brutal. But also, Adolfina was always Eglantine's sloppy seconds, and Sigiswald has made that abundantly clear by ignoring her since her introduction into the story. That likely won't change even after they're officially married. After winter, she's moving crap into Sigiswald's villa, but while she's both bitter and busy, Sigiswald wants to see her for some reason. Does dude have no respect for other schedules? Apparently not. If only it was about canceling their engagement or something, then she wouldn't mind. So she heads off to see the dumbass where he delivers some news. His second wife has just given birth. Great, that means their marriage is delayed. Right? We already know the issues around pregnancy and taking another wife with Sylvester, but Sigiswald acts like a condescending ass and just tells her to listen better. He didn't say he was delaying their starbind, only that he'll be delaying intimacy with her. What the fuck? That's incredibly rude. Basically, she'll be a wife in name only as they can't begin a proper relationship, while the dude expects her to pick up Nahalashe's workload. But don't you realize just how desperate they are for mana and manpower in the royal family? That sad story could bring you to tears, but that's also an absolute slap in the face to her. He drops the cherry on top that Rosemine is serving as the High Bishop for their starbind, which is news to her, so they can't delay it. It would be rude to Ehrenfest otherwise, but I guess the main issue is, it would be denying him a real blessing to secure noble support. Well, Adolfina is against that too, because she doubts Rosemine wants to be troubled by this bullshit, and she's not wrong. Anastasius is the one who set this up, which is arrogant as hell on Sigiswald's part to let his brother prop him up like this, and Sigiswald goes to end it there. But Adolfina isn't taking this lying down. She tells him she's not accepting this, and the dude's gonna have to explain it to her family and retainers personally. So the starbind comes, and Adolfina is still in a bad mood over this crap. She forces a smile at her father's insistence, as she meets with Sigiswald for the marriage outside their dorm. Her cape is removed and replaced with a black one. We learn that while sovereign noble capes are black, their inner lining actually has the color of their duchy of origin. This isn't the case with royals, however. They wear pure black capes, which is what Adolfina is getting. Once it's on her, her father kneels, because she's basically a member of the royal family now, so she outranks him. Despite them arguing about her marriage, she isn't super happy seeing that sight. Turns out they actually might have a decent relationship, and with that, he wishes her well. And after the starbind itself, Adolfina's treatment still doesn't improve. She's locked in Sigiswald's villa and not really allowed to socialize because, well, she wasn't a part of the royal family's pre-game meetings to avoid information being leaked. But she has so much free time on her hands, she decides to do some brewing. And why not some charms for her husband? That's certainly a suggestion that she got, though she decides to make one for herself too. To the goddess of separation, of course, basically praying for a divorce. The ride never ends with Sigiswald though. The last day of the conference, she's finally allowed out in public, and gets hit with another dedication ritual, as well as a load of rumors flying around. So as soon as they're back in the villa, she demands answers from Sigiswald, who matter-of-factly tells her the decisions that were made. Rosemine is close to obtaining the Grutricite, will be adopted by his father next year, and then will become his third wife after coming of age to give him the Grutricite. I mean, can he really disrespect Adolfina any more than this? Well, you would think, but he definitely can, apparently. He then dumps the job of welcoming Rosemine into the royal family on her lap. The idea that she'll be his third wife needs to be widespread, or else Anastasius could become king because he's close to her. Yes, Sigiswald does still view his brother with some hostility. But wait, while Adolfina welcomes the chance to socialize with Rosemine and maybe even research together, won't she have her own villa? Oh yeah, turns out there's a villa on the Royal Academy grounds they're gonna give her. Raublut was given the key to scope it out before it gets cleaned. Either way, Sigiswald expects that she'll make a good source of mana, even if she can't get the Grutricite, and that basically just fuels Adolfina's dislike of this jackass even more. Next is Schlaftraum's flowers from Hortensia's perspective. After the winter term, she commutes home rather than staying in the dorm. And when getting there, Raublut wishes to have a private discussion with her. This is rare as hell, because he calls her into his actual room. He tells her about the ivory building collapsing, and the king wants all the foundational magic tools checked to prevent another. Now, Hortensia did just check a ton with Raimund recently, and the libraries was filled after the dedication ritual, but they're now worried because they know that archive contains important documents down below. So she's tasked with double checking those now since the royals will fill them during the Archduke conference. Now, usually royal foundations require royal mana to fill, and that's why Hortensia couldn't actually fill the libraries. But then again, royals participated in the dedication ritual, so that probably explains that. Either way, she's gonna stay in the dorm and double check the tools until the Archduke conference, but he asks if she can actually enter the scholar building and check that one too, because none of the professors are responding to his request. Big shocker there. Chances are, they're too immersed in their research to care. On her way back to the dorm the next day with her attendant, they chat. This woman is Demira and she's Hortensia's age. They've known each other forever, and she's served her since before marrying Raublut. But her biggest concern is that he's using this chance to have another woman over at the estate. Seems weird, but there's a reason for her to believe that. When Hortensia first married Raublut, his head attendant flat out told Hortensia and Demira not to expect love. The guy was already in love with another woman. Obviously, he can't be with her, otherwise he would be, but that also doesn't really change much for their situation. But on the way to the dorm, they bump into Loyalitat, the Sovereign Knight's vice commander. Weird seeing him here. The Knights are extremely busy with all these recent incidents, but they're currently ramping up security for the impending Starbind. The Sovereign Temple is in a bit of a mini civil war over this whole High Bishop issue, but there is some confusion over whether the royal family requested Rosemine to help, or whether Rosemine wanted to show the Sovereign Temple how it's done. This shows us that the Sovereign Knights Order has issues with communication. Hell, Raublut is acting alone at times, which they're not supposed to do, since that could add an element of bias. The Knight jokes about Hortensia being away from the house because, who knows, maybe Raublut invited another woman over, and Demira jumps on that train pretty quick. Well, that got awkward, but Loyalitat tells her to rest assured, Raublut is a loyal husband. When they were in Arnsbach last summer, Fabi's battles and old workstock got so bad, the Knights were told that Schlaftraum's flowers were in bloom by Georgine, and then she gave them some women to ease their minds. However, Raublut pointed to a vase with some white flowers in it, and says that he actually prefers those instead. Now this might make him seem like a softie, but he didn't actually bring any flowers back home. That's pretty weird. After checking the foundational tools and writing out reports, suddenly Anastasia stops by and says he has an important matter to discuss with Solange and Hortensia. He gives them sound blockers and provides them with some magic contracts, one promising they won't discuss what they're about to, and the other is a vow of loyalty to the king. Hortensia has to refuse signing the vow of loyalty though, which makes Anastasia's balk. How the hell can she just decline? But she explains that in order to get the keys to the archive, which the royal family wanted her to do, she had to sign a magic contract with Mestianora and become a guardian of knowledge. We already know what happens when you break a magic contract, so that would actually happen to Hortensia if she signs this. You can't really vow to be loyal to two separate people, and that's the exact same reason the old arch-librarians were executed in the first place. So, will she be executed too? After a moment, Anastasia says that the silence contract will do, since she's pretty much already proven she's loyal to the royal family. Hell, she even served the previous Gertrude owner. From there, he explains that they're looking into a thing called Trug. The palace library didn't have anything, but a professor from about 50 years ago taught about it. They want Hortensia and Solange to look into his old notes, though those might not even exist anymore depending where the professor's disciple hailed from. But she says she'll do what she can, and as it turns out, the disciple was executed in the Purge. She broadens her search for plants that cause the same effects, and actually gets a hit. In a diary over 200 years old, there's actually a drug described that matches what she's looking for. It was used on women in a particular position, and the ingredient listed was Schlaftraum's flowers. So she sends off a report to Anastasius to inform him of her findings. In the meantime, Demira returns home and discovers Raublut visiting with the Sovereign High Priest. That's extremely weird, but the only piece of conversation she actually picked up was about Emmanuel receiving Ehrenfest's flower in return for something. Gross. Anyway, the Starbind has put the order in talks at the temple, so it was probably about that, right? Before the Archduke conference, Anastasius visits to hear Hortensia's findings. She tells him about Schlaftraum's flowers here, how the name went from a street name for a drug to referring to the women who actually used it. The flowers themselves aren't easily gotten apparently, they're from somewhere really far away, but the women actually sound similar to flower offerings from the temple, except they catered to archdukes and royals. Also, they were the ones sending out invitations rather than nobles approaching them. One invitation, detailed in the diary, was marked with a white blossom. Sound familiar? That's probably code. This is over 100 years old, but neither Anastasius nor Hortensia have seen records of it pop up. But apparently in Arnsbach, it now just refers to women given to knights after battle. Well, Arnsbach cropping up here strikes a chord with Anastasius, so he tells Hortensia to ask someone from Arnsbach if the term is commonly used there. Now, not specifically, but broach the subject pretty broadly. And Anastasius sets up a plot where Det Lind, or one of her retainers at least, would come to the library so Hortensia could ask, but also try to make sure Rosemine hears. She always picks up on the weirdest details. Anyway, she could do that, and that would be great. But again, how is she gonna bring this up? Anastasius doesn't get why she isn't more mad about her husband taking flowers from another woman, but Hortensia kinda finds that jealousy a bit cute, like in a youthful way, because there is zero love in her marriage with Raublu. Speaking of, after she managed to ask Det Lind, there was zero reaction to the term from her or her retainers, so it must only be used in Georgine's circle then, right? And with everything popping off at the conference, she didn't really have a chance to report to Anastasius, so when she heads home, expecting to get a summons later, she finds Raublu waiting for her with a single question: who told her about Schlafdraum's flowers? Damn, these are some real packed side stories, as we saw Sigiswald's true colors, but also a massive cliffhanger with Hortensia. But while these side stories ended again with Raublu and a ton of questions in the air, I'm sure you're dying to know what happens next. Nothing good, but that won't be fully realized until volume 9 or 10. In the meantime though, let's wrap this video up with my final thoughts. This volume was absolutely packed with information and plot twists at every turn. There were a lot of developments that'll impact this story from here on out. There was an Archduke conference and Rosemine was meant to perform a ceremony, followed by leisurely transcribing documents. What could go wrong? And in the process, she stumbled into a power struggle within the Sovereign Temple, who are now trying to steal her for themselves to claim more power nationwide, the path to the Book of Mestianora that may or may not be the fabled Gertrude site for ruling the whole country, and now she's being pulled away from her home to become a princess to help solve the issues plaguing said country. And the implications of those developments back in Ehrenfest are going to be earth-shattering. But that was just in the main story, because the side stories gave us hints at just how much turmoil is below the surface, as Raublu seems to be plotting something with the Sovereign Temple while being in contact with Georgine. When I say this is where the series ramps up, it really is. Things in Ehrenfest take a bit of a backseat this volume due to obvious developments, but it's still worth talking about what little we got there. That would be the traditions that were mentioned. Rosemine's been told about this since way back in part 2, when Ferdinand put a moratorium on the printing press due to just how much it would upset the country's political climate. But other than that, there's rarely been much pushback against our lead changing traditions. Most of the time, they just seem silly and in her way. But I really enjoyed Bonifatius's perspective, because he's not against Rosemine's proposal simply because of tradition. He merely sees that changing it would have negative consequences. It would make name swearing synonymous with traitors and criminals, while ruining the reputations of those who did it as a show of absolute loyalty. Though there is the very real threat of death, Eustace and Eckhart take pride in the fact that they gave their names to Ferdinand. Veronica and Georgine were considered pretty damn ruthless for demanding names to keep people in line, so Rosemine twisting it isn't desirable, even by her, because it would reflect poorly on people she cares about, Matthias and Lorenz included. I don't lump Gresha in there because she gave her name to demonstrate her loyalty, rather than because she had to, but we can see that the outcome with her new name sworn is basically in line with tradition, despite the means by how they came to that position not being so. I'm sure people are wondering what the deal is with the Royal Academy at this point in the story. Not only does it have an archive that teaches people how to become a true Zent with precious documents for running the country and duchies, but also shrines to every god so one can increase their elements and protections. Hell, then there's the fairly easy access to that for those looking to become Zent, if they have the knowledge where to start. And the thing is, that seems kind of out of place until you get the whole story. The Royal Academy is incredibly important, and no, that's not spoilers. Just the simple fact that the Garden of Beginnings is there was a massive indicator of the cultural and historical significance of the site. But in a few volumes, we'll understand what its true purpose is, and why so many incredible religious stuff is there. It does have an explanation. You're just gonna have to wait. I keep bringing this up, but it also keeps being relevant to every book the royals interact with Ehrenfest. The royal family's poor dealings with the lower-ranked duchies finally pays off entirely this volume. Now back in Volume 3, we saw Anastasius chastising Ehrenfest for not living up to their rank, as well as testing them to see if they had what it takes to be an upper-ranked duchy. Hell, he even had to ask Sylvester how to consult lower-ranked duchies for their input. And this mentality finally pays off this volume with the king offering Ehrenfest what any greater duchy would kill for. Clarissa even stated that sending Rosemine to the Sovereign Temple would be common sense to Dunkelfelger. Sacrificing a single Archduke candidate to gain a ton of favor with the royal family, and demonstrating their value to the other winning duchies, and hell, even getting the losing ones to owe you. But we know that Ehrenfest doesn't have the leeway for that because they only have 4 Archduke candidates, when greater duchies would most likely be packing 6 or more. On top of having adult family members who could ease the administrative and mana burden back home. The biggest mark Veronica left on their duchy, well, besides Wilfried's incompetence, was making damn sure they didn't have more people like Bonifatius to shoulder the load. And that leads to Sigiswald getting a pretty harsh lesson from Rosemine. By expecting Ehrenfest to jump at the opportunity to send a single Archduke candidate and as many nobles as they want like a greater duchy would, they were essentially telling them to let their duchy fall to ruin for the sake of the royals. It shows not just poor political awareness, but comes across as painfully ignorant and cruel, and that's why the royals don't have that great of a reputation among the middle and lesser duchies. This is a bit of a subtle detail, but one worth mentioning. Ferdinand's research on the Royal Academy's mysteries was foreshadowing some of the things that came up in this volume. If you recall in Herscher's lab, Rosemine found a map of the Academy grounds with some points marked off on it. She assumed they were the locations of various mysteries that he investigated, but it's explained that the Academy grounds are shaped like a circle, and there were more than 20 locations marked. The fact that the dancing statues led Ferdinand to the Garden of Beginnings, and the shrine locations being much more known back then, being that they were Ditter landmarks and Bonifatius and Riarda knew about them, most likely spurred his interest and put him on this path. But his research ended abruptly without a conclusion. Herscher even said that he often did that when he didn't plan on publishing his findings. So what does this mean? We'll find out in Volume 7, but understand that Ferdinand's knowledge is extensive, since he was researching the mysteries, and had read in the archive enough to know where the documents related to the Grutra site were. And probably the biggest shadow hanging over this volume is the connection between Raublut, Adelgisa, Arnsbach, and Georgine. It's been pretty plainly stated at this point, but Raublut was in Arnsbach where he spoke to Georgine about Schlafdraum's flowers, which are connected to some villa archdukes visited for rigorous nighttime activity. And they were also apparently rare. Now we know of one such villa, because Ferdinand mentioned it to Rosemine back in Part 4. So this means that we have a strong connection between 2 dangerous players, with an unknown factor who's been mentioned multiple times to be a pain in the ass. Lanzanov. Raublut was even speaking with Emmanuel in the side story, so we know the Sovereign Temple is now wrapped up in this too. But what's the plan? They're trying to get Rosemine separated from Ehrenfest, while spreading Trug throughout the Sovereign Knights Order. We were even told that the Sovereign Knights Order's communication is lacking this book, so this is setting up the groundwork for a lot of factors that'll lead to important moves in the next few volumes, especially after Raublut confronted Hortensia at the end of her side story. But understand, we will get a glimpse of just how dangerous the situation truly is next volume, and it only gets worse from there. So that's it. This video was packed with a ton of information. Rosemine just went to perform a simple starbind and transcribe. But that turned into a race for the Grutra site, a plot to get her out of Ehrenfest, and now she's about to be adopted by the royal family and become a princess? Things really do escalate when she gets involved. But how will Ehrenfest react to this news? Hell, what's next volume even gonna hold now that things are getting so out of hand? And more importantly, what's the deal with Arnsbach, Raublut, and Lanzanov? We'll get some answers next volume. But for now though, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with a link down in the description. If you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to Ariel Autumn Sage Stott, JMunt33A, Pokeflute, Robin DBL, Samuel Chen, Tristan, and Vonstrom for their continued support. Thanks for watching.